Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings. And joining me here, again, returning guest to the show, he's the captain, he's the president and CEO of VoicesOfWrestling.com. He's currently actively rooting for his baseball team to achieve a record level of futility. It's Rich Kraetsch. Rich, how are you doing today on this
I'm doing
wonderful
well.
Saturday morning?
Doing well for my a giant corner office at the Voices of Wrestling skyscraper, my great parking spot, my
You're right in
executive bathroom,
downtown
all that stuff.
Chicago, like
Yeah,
right in
absolutely,
the
right in the
loop.
heart of the
Yeah.
city. Well, I did West Loop. That's like the up and coming area. So we're right by
Okay.
Google, McDonald's, these small companies that we're are hoping to get on our level one of these days. That's where we're at. Yeah, huge expense, gigantic expense every single day for this giant office that's always empty because most of our people are remote. So yeah, just classic good business stuff here. But yeah, not only am I rooting for my baseball team to achieve futility, the White Sox. They're not, and they should have done it this weekend, but unfortunately they won, and now they're not even the best at losing. So maybe they can, but there's still plenty of time to restart another losing streak. They're already at, I think they're already at two as we're recording this. They're already at two in a row. But more than that, I'm also today rooting against my country to win a gold medal in basketball. I'm at this very weird situation where at the beginning of the Olympics, I looked at the betting lines.
You be careful, Rich. This is going to turn into an Olympic basketball podcast very quickly.
It is, and that's okay. That's fine. But that's not why you came. But that's fine
because I have some takes.
Oh, maybe at the end. Maybe we'll do it for the end if people want to come back. But so at the beginning of the Olympics, I looked at all the lines or whatever, and Canada and France had like insane lines. Like obviously the USA was runaway favorites. There's no point in betting on the USA to win gold in men's basketball or whatever. So I said, you know what? I'll put $20 or whatever on France and $20 on Canada. Who knows what happens? And Canada, obviously, they flamed out, did not work out well, but France is here. Now I stand to win a good amount of money if France defeats the United States to win the gold medal. But I can't look thankfully my grandpa who did serve in World War II, I wouldn't be able to look him in the eyes if I had to root for France to beat USA. So I'm just going to sit back, and I think any scenario that happens is going to be fine. I'll either win money if France wins or USA wins. So either way, but a part of me kind of wants that. It's a good amount of money. It's a decent amount of money. So I'm hopeful that France could. I was really just hoping Serbia beat the USA, and then I'd be like, oh, cool. Yeah, France could beat Serbia, and I'm good to go. Now I'm a little conflicted, but it's fine.
Yeah, I don't have any money on the Olympics, but I will go further than you, Rich. I'm kind of like actively rooting for France today. By the way, we're recording this.
Yeah,
Like
everybody,
before the
this will be
game, and
already
everyone is
over.
going to listen to this after the game. But
Yes.
I have a hard time rooting for the Team USA. Me and you discussed this before the tournament. We were like, I was like, what is this monstrosity of a Team USA?
Yeah.
It seemed to be. I just, it's like I watched the Serbia game, and like when they made the big comeback in the fourth quarter, and like the guys were like celebrating super hard, and it's like on one hand, I'm like, if any team made a big comeback in the semifinals of an Olympic game, they'd be like celebrating super hard. But I'm like, they have such a massive advantage in talent. Like, I find it hard. It's like rooting for a bulldozer to go over a tulip.
Yes.
Like,
yeah. Team America's 11th best player would be like the fourth best player on Serbia or whatever. And it's like
it'd probably be the second best player.
It might be modestly be the second best player. Yeah.
I mean, that's
depending
Serbia
on the
team.
Bogdanovic.
Yeah, that Serbia
not much.
team. That Serbia team is like Jokic and Boki, and I think that those are the only two NBA players. They have a couple guys who have like been in the NBA before.
Yeah, there's Jokic and then a few dudes that like you've kind of heard of, and then Bogdanovic is like the only guy that is
like,
the other legitimate NBA player, and then the rest are just kind of whatever. So
Jason Tatum can't get into the rotation though. He'd be a bad matchup against these Eurobasket guys.
He should go to Serbia. He should renounce his USA citizenship and join up with one of these teams that's just on the edge. He should try to see if he can go deep into the family tree and be like, actually, I have a little bit of
yes.
Trying to figure out what team would he join?
Tatum.
Yeah, just throw throw some sort of umlaut or that little tilde over the U, and he's in. Yeah, he's.
Yeah, the Celtics fans I know are extremely unhappy with Steve Kerr, and I mean I don't know, maybe it's
he's resting up. He's resting up.
Yeah, I know. Like that's like the logic is like, hey, you know what? Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown not being Jason Tatum getting benched, Jaylen Brown not playing at all. That's probably like realistically a good thing from like a health perspective. But
all right, I quickly figured it out, and then we can talk about professional wrestling.
Okay.
Tatum's father, who I don't know if he's on a good relationship with his father, but for the purposes of this,
Are you talking about Justin Tatum?
yes, I don't know. Are they cool or not cool? I don't know where
I
they're.
believe they are cool. And speaking of,
Okay,
yeah, he's been a little outspoken about as has
well,
Tatum's mother.
his dad is he's a coach of a team in the Australian National Basketball League. So all he has to do, show up for a game or two with his dad's team and say, you know what? I'm feeling very Australian. And he'd propel that Australia. They were pretty good. They just need another body. You know, you got
Yeah, I
FIBA
mean, they
Patty,
would make
Jason
yeah,
Tatum.
they would
It's not
make the
bad.
Olympics for sure. The
Yeah.
can you do that in FIBA? Can you like if you played like an official FIBA tournament? I know you can't do this in soccer, but if you played like an official FIBA tournament, could you change nationality?
Yeah, I don't
Like,
know. I know that you can. I always forget how the nationality change thing has to happen because obviously Joel Embiid was bouncing around a lot over the last couple of years.
but Embiid never played. Like Embiid
Yeah,
never,
he
I
never
think,
played in a
played in
yeah.
like like a first a senior team national tournament like the Olympics.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know because
Em-
yeah, you'll see like FIBA all the time. And you're like, what the hell's that guy? And it's like, oh, he played 2 years in
oh
Turkey, and now he's
yeah, like
Turkish, and you're like, oh, okay,
yeah,
that's fine.
former Boston College basketball legend Tyrese Rice, I believe, plays for the Montenegrin basketball team um, as a naturalized citizen of Montenegro. Um, he's just been playing in Europe for like the last 10 or 15 years. But yeah, you'll see that from time to time.
It's a stretch to get Tatum there, but I think we can do it.
Yeah, well, I heard Embiid say like he said like next time in 2028 he's going to be back, and he says it might not be for Team USA, it might be for Cameroon, and I'm like, first of all, you're full of shit, Embiid. You just want to coast to the only thing you're ever going to win in your entire career, which
Get
is
his
gold
ass, yeah.
medal. Um,
And he almost cost it. He
I know.
almost cost him to not win one. So
I think he's in for a rough season again. Um, but like I don't think you can just switch. Like, all right, I'm going to play for Cameroon now that I've got my gold medal for Team USA.
yeah.
Like, I think he pretty much said like he's like I don't want to play for Cameroon because I don't think they have a chance of winning, which I think is like a shitty attitude towards national team play. But um, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the entire process I think is very political and probably aimed at trying to form the next super team. If that's what history of Team USA
Oh, of
basketball
course. Yeah, of
indicates
course.
to us that um, this is a recruiting tool.
It's a Nike tool too. It's a Nike advertisement, basically. It's another big thing too. A lot of Nike players out on those teams. A
Yeah,
lot of Nike players.
weirdly, it would be funny if they
Yeah.
just like really went like they were just full on Team Nike, just like no other
Why
players.
not?
Like Steph isn't on the team because he's Under Armour.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, just it's just all Nike guys. They don't have the like 11th. They like the 11th Nike guy is like someone who's like barely a rotation player. It's like Gary Trent Jr. It's like, oh yeah, we really thought Gary Trent Jr. could help the team.
He's got a new shoe. We got a new Gary Trent Jr. shoe coming out for some reason. So
All right. Anyway, we're
well, let's
here.
talk about
Oh yeah,
wrestling.
that
I
was dangerous.
guess.
That
I
was a
guess.
yeah. You
All
brought
right,
that up,
fine.
Rich. That was a
It's my
dangerous.
fault. It's my fault.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, if Gershon Yabusele beats Team USA, um, I think that'd be pretty surreal to happen.
USA is going to win by like 45, and we're going to come on and people will be like, "You can't believe you even thought France is going to win," but I don't know, maybe not, maybe not.
I don't think I think Team USA is going to win. I just
Yeah,
am
oh, I do too.
rooting. I just think it's definitely way funnier if Team USA loses.
It's always the freakouts are always
Yeah.
fun.
I do care. This is the first time I've ever really cared. I don't really know why. I just like rooting for someone in all the different events, I guess. But like I am like looking at that gold medal count of between USA and I think China. They're tied. They were tied, I think, at 33 heading into today. And I was like kind of counting them up in my head. I'm like, all right, the two basketball ones, those are probably pretty good locks. Women's soccer is playing for the gold. That's good. Like, are there any more track events? Are there any more events that like Team USA has a shot to win? I keep thinking like the events that the Chinese are really good at, like diving, are like wrapped up, but then there's always like, oh no, it's the men's 3 meter dual platform
There's
event.
always weird shit that comes up on
Yeah,
like Saturday morning or
yeah.
Sunday morning. There's
And it's
something
like,
weird happening right now that nobody knows about that some country's going to get like 7 medals in that you don't even know is
what's
happening.
the
So
what's the Olympic sport you would most like to do that you haven't done
we were
before?
talked about this on the flagship recently. I want to get into handball.
I skip over that shit.
Oh,
That's
damn.
bullshit.
Well, you
Yeah.
missed it. We talked about handball. I said I found a handball association in Chicago, and I'm going to try to jump in and
You're
see if
gonna
I can
get
play some
wrecked
handball.
by like these like ex-Yugoslavian
Yeah,
guys
it's fine.
that are like
I get
serious
wrecked by
handball
them playing
players.
basketball anyway. I
Yeah,
get wrecked
but
playing
you
those
now
guys.
but you have a lot more experience playing basketball than you do for like
Yeah, it's
handball.
fine.
I played handball in college. We had like intramural handball. Because it's pretty much you could just put it on a basketball court and use the
Yeah,
3-point
right.
line as like the throw line. And we got some like indoor soccer nets. It's pretty fun, you know. It's really like if you have like a really strong throwing arm, like you're a baseball player,
Yeah.
that's really like the best skill to have at handball.
Yeah, that's kind of why I thought I was like, well, it looks, it has some fundamentals of basketball to it, lateral movements and
You got to
occasionally
dribble
bouncing a
the
ball,
ball,
but you don't
yeah.
necessarily have to bounce the ball. I think I gotta tune myself up on the rules a little bit. But then the big key is just, yeah, you have to have like a baseball arm, and I played baseball and basketball my entire life, so it's like, oh shit, I think I could probably try that. I don't know if I'm going to be an Olympic gold medalist in a handball, but as watching it, I was like, oh, that's a sport I feel like I could definitely have fun playing. The rest of it, I'm good. I don't need to be
Yeah.
doing anything else. That's
Yeah.
I already play basketball, and I don't. Actually, you know what? I honestly think you, me, and we could find one other person on Earth, and probably in this country, and maybe make a run at the 3-on-3. For the Los Angeles Olympics, given the given how Team USA and really all the teams, like Team USA was particularly ridiculous and awful. But I'm watching a lot of these other teams, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't think any of these guys are good.
They're not like the high level
They're not. They're
players. Like
really
we're
not.
under the impression that's like, oh, we're sending like our worst players, and like like I don't know, like Lithuania is playing
Yeah.
like
Oh,
is sending
yeah.
like
Eastern Europe
their
is bringing their best because they
well
love
they're
3-on-3 basketball. And then you watch these guys, and they have like widow's peaks, and they clearly look like they smoke. And you're like,
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know
they're
about these
playing
guys
like their
either.
13th, like the idea is they're playing like their 13th, 14th, and 15th men from the national team. But there's all
Yeah.
sorts of weird rules. Like you got to be like in the top 50 rankings for 3-on-3 basketball. Like you
Yeah.
basically have to like find guys who want to give up like their normal like club careers
Hmm.
to like become professional 3-on-3 basketball players where there's not nearly as much money in it. Um, it's kind of weird. I honestly think they should just like if they want to include 3-on-3 basketball, they should be like if you have a national team that makes the Olympics and regular basketball, you can't play 3-on-3. Like like make it kind of like a sport for like more like developing basketball nations than like all like the good basketball countries playing.
Yeah.
Like that probably makes more sense, but um it's not a big American thing, so I don't want to just shit on it. Like that's like the worst piece of Olympic content is like here are these sports that are popular in other countries that we don't understand in America, but here's some suggestions to make them better.
But we
Like
can make 3-on-3 better, though. That's we can do that. I don't that's the thing that bothers me is I know people play 3-on-3 in America. We can find
I
this. We
think
can find people.
we should just send our YouTubers. Like it should be like the professor and like a couple other
Yes, that'd be
guys.
fine. That'd probably work. Yeah, the professor and
That's a missed
one
opportunity. Like
one of the
you know
Dude
how
Perfect guys.
yeah, you know how, well I
Yeah.
don't know if the Dude Perfect guys are actually
No, I'm
but
kidding. I'm kidding.
But, like, you know, I don't think I watched a second of the Team USA 3-on-3 basketball, but if you told me that the professor was gonna play in the 3-on-3 basketball, I know he's
I
like
bet
5'.
Professor AO could probably still go.
Yeah, who's still
And
around
then
from because like, the professor's, like, not that old. I think he's, like, under 40 still. Like,
yeah,
what's
he's I still I watch him on YouTube all the time. It's one of those videos that like it comes I was getting on like Facebook. It's just like Professor like
you know, like,
crosses dude in Venice Beach, and I'm like, I'm not gonna watch this. And then I watch it, and I'm like, oh, it's
yeah,
pretty sweet.
he's, like, dressed up as Spider-Man or something like
Yeah,
that.
I watch every single one of those. So every time the algorithm, I'm like, another professor video. I don't want this, but it nailed it because I'm like, I'll watch
Yeah, I
this.
don't know which one of those guys are still, like, around. There's also probably, like, other YouTube guys that I don't know.
Yeah,
Ac
I'm going from the YouTube guys or the street ball dudes I know from 2005, but I'm sure there's
one
new
of the
dudes out there.
guys,
Yeah.
I play pickup with him on occasion, and he is a YouTube like basketball like vlogger. And he
Oh,
brings
okay.
like his whole camera crew, which is really just like one guy holding a camera, and he like mics himself up. Um,
Hmm.
and it's really
I hate
stupid, but
it. I hate it so much.
Rich. It's really stupid, but I'm like when I play with him, I'm like, oh man, like I want to make like a bunch of shots, and then I can like brag about how I was on this YouTube uh thing. He actually just like went to some tournament. Um, it's called, like, The Next Chapter, which I guess is just, like, one of those, like, YouTube channels that where, like, guys that, like, play basketball in college go around and, like, play pickup against, like, teams in other cities.
Okay.
And he like was in some sort of like gigantic one-on-one tournament with like 100 other invited guests, and he won. So now he's gonna be like end up like I think he's gonna be like on this like YouTube series and become like a professional basketball playing YouTuber. So
Okay. Hey.
I'm kind of like, yeah, like I was there at the beginning when he was just
Right.
going
I knew
around
him.
with
I
his
had a 3 on him a couple weeks ago. I'll tell you that.
Shout out to JTV. That's his YouTube channel.
JTV. All right.
Yeah,
I'll have to look out for him.
He played basketball at Fitchburg State, which is a Division III school here in Massachusetts. Like he's actually good. Like he's not like one of these people that's like trying to like pretend that they're good, which is most of the people I seem to play basketball with now these days. Anyway, okay, wrestling.
Yeah, let's do it.
The purpose of this episode is about a year ago I did an episode with Case Lowe talking about where is wrestling going, and that was really focused on kind of like looking at the last 15 years of pro wrestling and kind of the style of pro wrestling and kind of how that has evolved like throughout the 2000s and 2010s. We talked a lot about like the Dragon Gate style kind of really influencing indie wrestling and therefore influencing some of the larger promotions, obviously AEW, but even WWE as well, in terms of like the in-ring style and pacing and smaller wrestlers becoming more prominent and things like that. And I wanted to kind of take a next step in that evaluation, but really look at the last year or so of not as much like in-ring style necessarily, as much as kind of the general booking and presentation of pro wrestling and kind of the philosophies that have gone into that, both at WWE and AEW. And I think we've definitely seen a lot of changes on the WWE end. We've seen some changes on the AEW end. I don't think they're nearly as obvious. Um, but I wanted to have Rich on because I do think that you and Joe talk about this topic quite a bit on the flagship. But I wanted to kind of have more direct conversation, looking at the big picture of what we've seen over the last year. And do you want to start with AEW or WWE?
Let's start with WWE. I think because we talked about it a little bit before we got on the air here, but I think what we've seen with WWE more than anything in the last year is a very clear idea of what Paul Levesque's WWE is going to look like. There was this weird period of control. Well, there was the first Vince McMahon quote unquote retirement. I'm using those in the biggest air quotes ever, resigning in shame, obviously. And that was that weird period where it was like, oh, Triple H is taking over, I'm sure of it. And then some people that were kind of keenly aware were like, I don't know, a lot of stuff kind of feels like Vince McMahon still has his hands in it or whatever. And then quickly it got revealed, oh yeah, well, I mean, Vince is still kind of there. We don't, he's not in charge, but he's. And then so there was that weird period where it was like, do we really know exactly what is Paul's and what's Vince's and what's. And then now that he's completely gone and we've had now a couple of years, and really it feels like this last year has been solidly 100%. If we look at WrestleMania, this has been Paul Levesque's vision for what this company is going to be. So I think that's a little bit easier to start with, because I do think now we have very clear ideas of what the big picture is going to look like and what kind of the tenor of a Paul Levesque booked WWE is going to look like. So I think it's a little cleaner, honestly, to talk about WWE. And then AEW, that who knows where that's going to go, because I don't know. That's there's a lot of questions more than answers about the AEW vision, but the WWE one, I think over the last year, it's a little easier to explain.
Yeah. So like when Paul Levesque took over, whether it was the first fake time or the second real time, what did you think? Like, what do you think the consensus of like what the WWE product was going to look like seemed to be?
Yeah, no, and I think we saw that pretty quickly on during the first, kind of fake takeover, which is perfect. We'll call it that. We'll call it the first fake takeover that he did. That was when there was that first Raw that Paul Levesque took over. And I remember everybody going nuts about, oh my God, the matches. If you do the match times, they're all they average 5 more minutes of match time. We're getting more in ring. So it was like, oh my God, and then Michael Cole said wrestling. Oh my God, it's a whole different era.
Remember when he said PWG?
Right. Yeah. So it was like, oh my God. And this is all in the first couple of weeks. Honestly, the first episode of Raw is like, a Seth Rollins match went 4.5 minutes longer, and people were like, oh, it's finally a new era of wrestling in WWE. And, Michael Cole's allowed to say fans and PWG and wrestling or whatever. So I do think that a lot of people anticipated and that it would be maybe cleaner A to B to C booking, which I think has held in the new thing as well, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I thought at least the consensus would be that it would be a little more focused on the in-ring and a little more focused on the bell to bell, because if you go look at NXT was built on very simple, the peak of NXT, the peak of takeover eras NXT, where Paul Levesque was in charge, was A to B to C booking, very simple bookings, simple progression, people moving up the ladder. And then it was also good in ring, that those takeovers would come and you would get some of the best in ring you would ever get in WWE. It was unquestionably, when you look at those takeovers, like, must see. I mean, clearly the stuff that you had to watch on the network, you had to watch when it was on Peacock. Like, that was the peak of in ring for WWE in that time period, because it was just blowing away what you were normally seeing. Maybe on a WWE pay-per-view, you get one or two, decent matches, but a takeover, sometimes you'd get 5 great matches, 5 or 6. They weren't huge cards, but it was like you would get those great matches. So I think the anticipation would be that, yes, the stories are going to make a little bit more sense. We're going to strip away a little bit of the weird rhetoric and a little bit of the weird universe and all these, and everybody has to kind of say these same things over and over again. And also, we're going to have a little bit better in ring, I think, is what the consensus would have been. Simpler booking, better in ring was essentially what we were going to do. And we kind of sort of maybe saw that for a little bit, but I would argue in the last year we have not seen that. And I think Paul Levesque's WWE is a lot different than what we maybe anticipated it was going to be.
Yeah, I think the idea was that was going to be like peak NXT.
Yeah.
Which was like, because that was what, and that makes sense because that was really the evidence we had of what Paul Levesque, when he's like, has a lot of autonomy, that's what his vision of pro wrestling would be, because that's what we saw. That was the evidence that we had so far. But the reality is it's nothing like that, I think. Certainly not from an in-ring perspective. Like, I mean, cage match has kind of gone wonky over the time period, and Dave Flation, but I'd be curious to know, like, comparing like the last like 3 or 4 years of like Vince's booking in this last like year and a half of Paul Levesque, um, and like see like what are the match ratings for the main roster, because I feel like that's probably not that different. Like, I don't feel like the in-ring product is significantly better than it was during Vince's last few years. Um, and I think that like the philosophy of like we're gonna have really high work rate matches with a diverse set of talent in terms of in-ring styles is not the case anymore.
No.
I think we have a totally different philosophical shift that the entire company is starting to be built around in terms of their match layout and how their storytelling is going to unfold in the matches. It is not, you know, Sami Zayn and Shinsuke Nakamura, or Ricochet and or Adrian Neville, or whoever you want to pick your peak NXT guy. It is very different than that. Um, I think, I mean, when Levesque pushed all these guys in NXT like Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa, uh, and the idea was like, oh, of course, Paul Levesque believes in Johnny Gargano as like a top guy. Like, I believed that because he pushed him really hard in NXT. What's happened when Paul Levesque has actually sat in the big seats and is now in charge of the main roster? Who's he pushing? Is he pushing those small indie guys that he liked to push
Absolutely
in
not.
NXT?
Big guys.
Well, right. So what did he actually believe this entire time? Maybe he believed, and it would fit into the WWE overall, Vince related philosophy, which is like, yeah, we'll push these small indie guys when we're trying to compete with these small indie companies, which is essentially what NXT was trying to do, is trying to be indie wrestling for WWE fans.
Right. It was supposed to be, don't go watch PWG, don't go to your local indie. We have your
Yeah.
indie right here. It's on the WWE
Yeah.
network and it's
Don't
called
watch Ring of
NXT.
Honor. Don't
Yeah,
watch New
right.
Japan. Um, that was the point of NXT. But now that, like, all right, well, now we have to reach the casual fan, or we have to reach the masses. It's going to be, Damian Priest. It's going to be Walter. Not that I have anything against Walter. I would push him too. But it's going to be Solo Sokoa. It's not going to be, Johnny Gargano is going to be an afterthought. Um, so that's a major change, I think, and kind of reveals kind of what the philosophy of WWE in terms of who they're going to push has not really changed since Vince was in charge.
No, it really hasn't. Yeah, because that I think would be maybe something again, speak that maybe people thought, oh, it'd be a good opportunity for smaller guys or more, like you said, more dynamic, guys to get a chance. But really, I mean, yeah, they haven't pushed really any of those types of guys. You know what I mean? Like Gargano and Ciampa, obviously, you probably weren't going to push them main roster. Maybe but they haven't even thought about it. You know what I mean? It hasn't even been an idea of pushing those guys. Like you can't even fathom if Adam Cole had left WWE that he would be pushed as a tippy top guy right now. You know what I mean? There's no chance of it. And like even people like a Finn Balor or whatever, who was pushed in the old regime of Vince McMahon and was pushed to a certain level. He's a little bit older now, but it's like, yeah, you don't envision him ever being a main eventer ever again. And it's pretty much just the same old guys. You know what I mean? Ricochet's leaving. Ricochet's leaving the company because he looks around and realizes, shit, I'm never going to get moving forward here. But the guys that are moving up the ladder are your Braun Breakers. The guys that are moving up your ladder are your guys that have the good bodies, the big bodies. They're tall, they're thick, they're wide, whatever it may be. And that's not a philosophical change whatsoever from Vince McMahon. And I think that to me is what I think the last year has proven to me that Paul Levesque's vision of WWE is a lot more similar to Vince McMahon's than we maybe ever thought or ever assumed or ever imagined. I think he hit on this bloodline thing, and I think he's realizing, shit, yeah, never mind. I'm in the big seat now. I'm in charge of WWE. I don't have to be an alternative to WWE. I can create my own thing here, and I don't need an alternative because this is working. So everything on this show now is going to be very similar to this. Which again is very simple storytelling, very A to B to C storytelling, the bloodline thing. I know it goes in a lot of different directions, and people pretend that it's like this unbelievable story that you have to watch this 9-hour video to understand. But it's essentially just a group of people get together, and then somebody joins the group of people that other people don't like, or somebody in the group of people does something that the other group of people don't like. It's everything. I mean, we've seen it with Alpha Academy, we've seen it with Judgment Day, we've seen it with Bloodline. We'll see it time and time again. They've clearly New Day is kind of starting to kind of go in this direction as well. That's sort of the style that they figured out. And I think he has realized, maybe smartly, that, yeah, now that I'm in the big seat, the big chair, just kind of do what Vince did. I mean, maybe he was onto something here a little bit, but I'm going to stick with stories a little bit more. And I think that maybe is one of the biggest differences, is that, Vince McMahon would sometimes wake up one day and just decide, fuck it, I don't like Braun Breaker anymore. And then after, months and months and months and months of pushing Braun Breaker, he would just decide, I don't like him anymore. I'm done with him. And then Braun Breaker would lose, and then you would just never hear from him again. You'd be like, oh, okay, that was weird how he was pushed for 8 months, and then he just disappeared, because that's how Vince was, because he was, insane in a lot of ways and strange. And yes, sometimes he would just wake up and decide, this guy sucks and I don't want this anymore. I don't feel like Paul Levesque is going to do that. I think he's going to see his stories through. But I mean, really, if you chart it out, and I didn't put names to who was booking what, I really don't think that much of Vince McMahon's last couple of years of booking would look all that much different than Paul Levesque's, other than the fact that it's not as, it doesn't succumb to wild fluctuations like Vince's booking tended to do. But for the most part, it's kind of just the same. It's kind of the same stuff. And really the pay-per-views, like you said, I think the pay-per-view is getting worse, honestly, in terms of actual bell to bell, which is unbelievable. I don't think anybody could have possibly predicted that, but the Paul Levesque pay-per-views have been atrocious. I mean, they've just not been very good in terms of what I think and what I want out of like bell to bell. But I even outside of stories, I don't know how you could watch these Paul Levesque pay-per-views and think that you're getting great pro wrestling and not, good. If you're there watching them for the story, sure, you're getting that. But I don't think you're getting great bell to bell pro wrestling, and I'm a bit surprised by that, given what peak NXT really hung its hat on.
Yeah, people can go back and they can read stuff I wrote like 6 or 7 years ago. So I swear I'm being consistent on this thought. I always found the idea that like Paul Levesque like was like this, like loved the modern wrestling style, and like was like a huge fan of indie wrestling and things like that, and liked pushing smaller guys. I always found that idea kind of preposterous, because he's fucking Triple H. Like, he's not, everything we know about that guy is like he thinks whatever he is doing is the best proper way to do something. And the idea that this guy who's been on the WWF booking committee since like 1997 is like incredibly different than Vince McMahon in terms of his overall philosophies. Um, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous that anyone really thought that. I get that NXT looked different. and there was obviously like more of a focus on smaller wrestlers and more of an open mind about who could be pushed. But realistically, like the idea that Paul Levesque was this some sort of like well-traveled, guy who studied wrestling from all over the world and is open to all these different philosophies is completely contradictory to everything else we know about him in his career.
Yeah, and I think what is happening more and more is that I think we should wake up and realize, and we talked about a little bit earlier, that NXT was not necessarily Paul Levesque's vision for what the idealized version of professional wrestling was. It was exactly like we said. It was, this is the alternative to what Vince McMahon is giving you on the main roster, and we are in direct competition with Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling, PWG, Evolve, all that sort of stuff. That's what it was. It was just the don't watch indie wrestling, watch us. We're going to produce
Which
indie
is smart,
wrestling.
by the way. Like that's
Absolutely,
like
it worked
you're
out great.
building instead of being stuck on your idealized version of wrestling, you built something that would attract the kind of audience you were seeking to attract.
Absolutely, and it worked incredibly well.
Yeah, and it probably and he also understood that this would help him curry favor with a certain segment of WWE fans who were
Absolutely.
disaffected with Vince's booking.
Absolutely, and now that he's taken over, a very little of what made peak NXT is there, and now it is just it does feel like an updated, refined version of Vince McMahon's sports entertainment, which is fine. And hell, I even made this reference on this week's episode of the Flagship, saying that in the end, it's like Vince Russo kind of won, because Vince Russo was very big in especially in 1999 WWF, telling Vince McMahon and telling everybody in WWE, you know what, bro, we don't need wrestlers. I don't want wrestlers. I don't care for wrestlers. Wrestlers want to do this and wrestlers want to do that. I would rather have actors. I would rather have a locker room full of actors, and I would just give them scripts and they would go out there and do their scripts. And maybe they do a little bit of bell to bell. They do a little bit here and there. They'd hit their move or whatever. But matches are worthless. We don't need matches. Matches get in the way of my stories. I want to tell my stories. And man, if we're not there, watch SummerSlam, man. And it's like, you don't need wrestlers to do any of the stuff that happened on SummerSlam. Everybody, you could teach an actor to do a shoulder block into the corner and hold their shoulder, because that's half the matches on SummerSlam were guys holding their shoulder. You don't need wrestlers to do a lot of the stuff that we saw on SummerSlam. You don't need wrestlers to do a lot of the stuff that we saw we see on Raw and SmackDown on a weekly basis. It's if you want just people to look at each other with weird faces and then everybody go, oh my God, why is he looking at him with the weird face? And ask other people, hey, where's this guy? I got to go find this guy backstage. And it's you don't need wrestlers to do that. And that's kind of what I think has been the revelation in the last year is, oh my God, we are entering a period with WWE where, to me, the wrestling has never meant less. And I don't know that I ever would have thought that to be the case with Paul Levesque running the show. I thought at least there'd be some modicum of focus still on the in-ring, and it feels like in 2024 we've seen that go in the complete opposite direction, and now we're telling stories like we've never told stories before in this company. It is a storytelling company way more than it is a wrestling company now.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about like major philosophical changes in wrestling and where wrestling is headed, that's really where I think the conversation starts. And it is the evolution of WWE going away from the last vestiges of traditional pro wrestling, which is focused a lot of times around show, don't tell, to now being a product where everyone is going into dialogue and everything is made very clear to the viewer about what these actions are, and every match now has a mid-match promo. I think we saw it started during the Thunderdome era, the PC era during the COVID-19, where they understandably experimented with kind of different styles of pro wrestling. And I think the first one that really stands out to me is the Roman Reigns versus Jey Uso. I think it was a Hell in a Cell match.
It was a Hell in a Cell, yeah. I
Yeah,
know exactly.
where
Yeah, exactly.
it was like Roman was like crying and making these faces, and it was like this super cinematic experience, I
Yeah,
guess.
it wasn't a match. It was two guys in
Yeah.
a Hell in a Cell talking and doing promos while occasionally hitting moves to each other, and it'd be like, I don't want to do this, but you're making me do this. And it was just, yeah, it was
You're my cousin, Oos.
yeah. People loved it though. And that was Joe and I went on the podcast a couple days after that and went, oh no, people love this match. And I don't like that people love this match at all. I'm very worried about what the future is going to bring in. Well, voila.
Yeah, and we're seeing that now, not just with the subsequent Bloodline matches, but now we're seeing it as kind of becoming the general house style.
It's a house style for sure.
It's definitely happening in NXT, where they're teaching the wrestlers the house style. And that really has become the major. I think when you have a show like SummerSlam, where you can look at a lot of the matches and be like, a lot of these have those aspects of it. The CM Punk and Drew McIntyre match is a perfect example of a match that was really focused on stories and guys being mic'd in the ring to tell the audience things, as opposed to just having like a standard wrestling match. And the major concern about this, Rich, is that it's working.
Mhm.
I think there was a point where, during Levesque's return to pro wrestling, when Vince finally really left, where I was like, you know what, there's a lot of enthusiasm and optimism about the product because Levesque is taking over. People who were sick of Vince are now going to tune into the product because Vince is gone. Cody's jump was really influential in terms of getting some more people interested in the product. Then you had CM Punk come back, and then you had The Rock, and it was like they're really, getting some big boosts over and over again. But eventually, this is going to wear out. But I think since WrestleMania, um, ratings are still good. Attendance is still really good. They're still, putting 10,000 people or more in a lot of these venues for Raw and SmackDown. And it's because people are interested in this product. People
Mhm.
are getting into the story. Like seeing the Judgment Day stuff unfold. They liked seeing the CM Punk and Drew match unfold the way it did. They like the Bloodline and Solo Sikoa and Roman coming back. And it is really something that has attracted, whether it's lapsed fans have come back, whether it's kids getting into the product for the first time. The product is really attractive to a lot of people that weren't watching wrestling a few years ago. Um, and that means it's probably going to be hugely influential in not only WWE, but in the rest of pro wrestling.
Absolutely. Yeah, because the wrestling industry is very much a copycat industry, and whatever the market leader is doing, a lot of other people are going to say, well, we want to be like that. Because also think about like a whole generation of fans that are now going to be brought up on this kind of style, which I don't think is changing anytime soon. I don't think Paul Levesque's going to wake up at Survivor Series and go, no, all this stuff, no, we're changing it all. We're going. So what you're going to have is a generation that's going to grow up in their formative years, and this is going to be the wrestling that they know. And say you run a local indie, are you going to want your local indie to be Ring of Honor style from 2003, or are you going to want your local indie to be similar to what people see on on WWE every single week? Like me, I would try
But
to be an
what
alternative. That's what I would do. But I see why an indie would say, "Well, shit, we got to do what they're doing."
well,
Here,
if you're a young wrestler, what's being shown? What are you being shown that's really important about
right?
being a young
Mhm.
wrestler? Um, and it has almost nothing to do with in-ring ability. The in-ring's not even like, I don't know, you said like I don't think the in-ring has ever mattered less in WWE. I'm thinking like, okay, in the 80s, like the in-ring really wasn't important. You had your occasional work rate guys, like in the tag team division or sometimes in the Intercontinental division, but the matches didn't really matter in the 80s. But I think traditional pro wrestling skill mattered in the 80s still, like in-ring charisma and promos.
Yeah, it was still done in the ring. Like this, a
Yeah,
lot for the majority of the stories were still
yeah.
done in the ring, and
Like
that's more what I mean is like the
yeah,
actual
Like
physical
Hulk Hogan.
aspect.
Yeah, like Hulk Hogan's like he wasn't like doing a bunch of cool moves or like even like being like super entertaining necessarily like in his like actual work, but like the Hulk Hogan story was told with him wrestling a wrestling match and him
Yeah,
pinning a guy's shoulders to the mat, 1, 2, 3. Um, that it was still like rooted in fundamental aspects of wrestling. This is different than that. This is like the promos don't even really matter, at least like the typical promos. Like having charisma, it does matter, but it almost the way you have charisma is almost different. Um, it's such a weird dynamic. It's so different than even I think like a few years ago. Like it's very different than the WWE style of like 2021.
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Um, and it is we're seeing like Levesque is having success with it. So you're like you said, you pointed it out like we saw it with the bloodline, but now we're seeing it with Judgment Day, and we're seeing it with like even like mid card stuff like the Alpha Academy stuff in the New Day. Um, where it is somewhat like the idea of behind it is very traditional pro wrestling in terms of like stables kind of getting suspicious of each other and breaking apart. But the execution of it is so different. I know I find it personally insulting and I don't like it at all. But to be, um, objective, it's clearly working. What's the number? Like you and I both have talked about this before. Like, are other circles where we talk with people who aren't like on the Voices of Wrestling Discord, would be like, for lack of a better term, more casual wrestling fans. Maybe they watch WWE, maybe they watch a little AEW too. What's like the number one thing you hear about, like, as a criticism of AEW in comparison to WWE?
Just no stories. Just all matches, no stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when AEW first started, like, we focused on like the cornet types who are like, oh, it's just a bunch of guys doing flips and slapping their thighs, and it's not real wrestling. And that was like the main criticism of AEW. But by far the most successful, like, propaganda spin against AEW, whether it was WWE pushing that, or grifters on podcasts pushing that, or WWE fans on Twitter pushing that, or whatever, however you want to say that narrative got out there. By far the most pervasive one was the idea that WWE tells stories and Tony's just booking dream matches that don't have a story behind them. Uh, and I can argue with those people and say, well, it's preposterous. Look at this match. Like, if you look at the last AEW pay-per-view card, here's like the build up to each one of those matches. Um, to the degree, and I know you and Joe feel the same way, like AEW like works too hard to try to explain why a match is happening instead of
Yeah,
just having a match. They have they try too hard to have stories. But the major difference is WWE tells their stories in such a direct and um consistent way in terms of how they make sure everyone in the audience knows exactly what's happening all of the time. And in the middle of the match, you don't need to rely on the wrestlers to tell a story through their actions, because they'll tell the story with their words.
right. Or the announcers will scream about what the story is 1,000 times over and over
Yeah.
and over again.
And like, that's insulting to me, but it is by far the most successful brand of why WWE, if you why WWE's wrestling is superior for some fans comparative to anything else, is
Absolutely.
because they feel like WWE is telling these stories and they don't feel like AEW is telling these stories. And it's really because AEW in a lot of ways is still relying on traditional pro wrestling means, while WWE is relying on this new philosophy of tell, don't show.
For sure. No, and that's definitely. Yeah, I have a couple friends that I work with that pretty much watch WWE, and they'll jump in and watch some AEW here and there. But I get a lot of my thoughts on what the casual fans, or whatever you want to call them, think from those guys. And yeah, to them it's all just about it's what they like about WWE is that it especially if they watch with their wives or something like that, or their partners or whatever, is that you get it's a very emotional based, and there's all this kind of, but also that it's easy to follow along, and you can miss a week and come back and it's like, oh, you can catch up because they're going to tell you what happened in the week that you missed. And their criticism of AEW is that if you miss a couple weeks, you come back, you have no idea what the fuck's going on. That why is this person doing this? Why is this person feuding with this guy? What, and to me, it's like, well, I don't know. I just look it up, just if I miss a week, I'll just, either look it up, or it's okay. I can miss a week. But I think it might have a bigger thing to do with just the way that we consume media these days as well, because the way that everybody consumes media now is that when they watch a show, they watch every episode of that show. And when if it's X-Men 97 or whatever, we're going to watch every episode of X-Men 97. And there was people that were going back and being like, oh, before X-Men 97 comes out, I got to go back and watch the old show so I can catch up. And I was like, no, you don't have to. I lived through the old show. It's like every episode was itself a self-contained thing. You know what I mean? Like, there was a couple of narratives that were, but you could just watch an episode of X-Men in 1994 and be like, yeah, that's kind of cool. And then you move on with your life. And if you missed the next 17 episodes of X-Men, you're fine. Yeah, you're okay. And then if you watch it again, 3 months later, it's fine. It's just X-Men. It's cool. Or I was liking it to the idea that, like, imagine like Seinfeld today. If you miss an episode of Seinfeld back in 1995 or whatever, it's all right. You're fine. You know what I mean? Like, you weren't home on Thursday night or whatever to watch Seinfeld. Yeah, it's okay. You moved on. And then you picked it back up next week and it didn't matter. Maybe you might never have ever saw that episode. You may have never saw that episode, or maybe when they showed it on reruns, eventually you got to see it, but that was okay. And you didn't freak out about it. People don't do that anymore. People must watch every episode of every single thing to keep up with every single story and make sure that they know the narratives and all that sort of stuff. And I wonder if WWE is playing into that, very much by telling, overarching narratives that if you that no matter what, watch us every single week and you will be, rewarded with the next progression of this very, very, very slow moving, detailed, linear story. And I just don't know if maybe that's working for people and, physicality and just like, hey, you're watching a pseudo sport, which I think AEW does, better than WWE, that, presenting a pseudo sport that, yeah, if you miss a week of Rampage, you miss a week of Collision, you miss a week of Dynamite, you'll be all right. You're okay. It's not that big of a deal. You're just watching but I think maybe that doesn't appeal to people as much as it once did. And people want the very, very, very easily told linear A to B to C storytelling that you get in most, modern television shows, the way that it's consumed on streaming media. I don't know. It's just a thought that I had.
No, I think that's a pretty, I never heard that before, but I think that's fairly interesting in terms of people being completionists now when before they weren't. And that in some ways WWE's product is it's kind of like the opposite of that, in the sense that you can actually miss WWE's product and it doesn't matter. And you see that criticism. I hear that criticism a little bit when people do watch like Raw and SmackDown every week. And there's the criticism of like, Raw really isn't important for you to watch most of the time. Like a lot of times stuff doesn't happen. Which in some ways is fan friendly. If people aren't going to be regular Raw viewers, if they're only going to tune in every few weeks, or maybe they're going to have it kind of backlogged on their DVR, or maybe they're going to rely on watching YouTube clips of it or social media clips instead of watching the whole show. But I think that it is that, and I think like the when I hear people say that, like these are people that will say like, oh, I like AEW, I like Bryan Danielson and Will Ospreay, and I think those matches are really good, but WWE has what I want out of pro wrestling, which is stories.
Yeah.
And I guess it's really an individual approach to pro wrestling that people like you and I aren't going to share, in the sense of like, I don't really care about watching pro wrestling for stories. I like the uniqueness of pro wrestling being these characters in like a simulated mock sport.
Yeah.
Is like a storytelling device that's unique to pro wrestling, but like the actual story, like a story that I'm gonna have like an emotional connection to, is not gonna come from pro wrestling necessarily. It's gonna come from like much better forms of media at storytelling. Like, I don't know, reading a book.
Yeah, but what's also weird about that too is I agree with you in a sense that like the reason that I got into professional wrestling was I was a sports fan, and then I saw this thing that kind of looked like sports, but the volume was turned up, 1,000%, to whatever wrestling was, and that appealed to me. The appeal was I am watching this kind of fake sport, and I knew I was never one of those people. I knew very early on when I was watching professional wrestling, like this is not on the up and up. You know what I mean? Because like, I always tell people,
like,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
knew pro wrestling was fake because that's all anyone ever said about pro wrestling, including my dad, who would watch it with me and then tell me how fake it was. Really supported the hobby, Dad. But like, I still believed like part of it was real.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of hard to describe. It's like how a little kid brain works. But it was
No,
like,
what I always bring up to people is that the first wrestling match that I really remember watching was like a Yokozuna versus Doink the Clown match. And like, even as a 5 or a 6-year-old, I was like, why a sumo wrestler is facing a clown? Like, something's not on the up and up here. Like, something's a little weird about this. But I couldn't figure out the minutia of how anybody, how they faked it. I knew it was fake, and I knew it wasn't on the up and up, but I didn't know exactly how. I didn't know how the sausage was made. So that kind of interested me. Is like, well, are they, who determines who wins? Is it just, I had no idea. I had no earthly idea. And as a little kid, I always search for the answer of who, how did they decide who won the wrestling matches, or how did they decide who was going to, win titles or whatever. I couldn't quite get a grasp on that. But yeah, when you watch a sumo wrestler, sit on a clown, I was like, okay, something's strange about this, but I can't quite put my foot on it. But that's what always appealed to me, is that pseudo sport aspect of it. And to your point about like, you don't look for deep, emotional narratives in professional wrestling. I think you can, because as a sports fan, I always found deep emotional narratives in sports, in this guy winning a championship and this team winning a championship and this guy that nobody believed in that now is getting a starting job and he's proving himself to be, a great player. Like, you can tell so many great stories. I mean, sports have so many great stories, for God's sakes. Go to any library, go to the sports section. It's like there's untold amount of stories and things that you can tell and emotions you can get from sports. And that always appealed to me in the wrestling, is that you can do that same sort of stuff, that same, idea of telling a story through sports, but have it be ultimately the physicality, the sporting aspect of it that really tells you that
Well,
story.
your promotion has to have roots in like some sort of sports-based presentation
Yeah.
and actions, and WWE is not like that. It hasn't been like that for quite some time.
Right.
I think there are narratives and storylines in sports that are interesting, but it's hard because that shit's real. Like, that's why real stories are interesting as opposed to
Yeah.
fiction stories. There's like a different standard. You remember the book A Million Little Pieces?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so like famous book from like probably 20 years ago now. It was a guy who was I actually didn't read it, but I believe it was about like drug addiction and recovery.
It was. Yeah.
And it was allegedly based on a true story. And the guy became like super popular because his story was so incredible. And like I think like he was like on Oprah, and he got like the Oprah Book Club's sticker, and he was like on all these short lists for Book of the Year and best selling book and things like that. And then it turns out like he was a huge fraud. The story wasn't real, it was fake. And then it became this like debate about like, oh, like, well, it should be considered like an excellent piece of fiction, even though because it's such a good story. But that doesn't really hold up because a lot of the drama was knowing that it was real.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and that's where you get the difference, I think, between pro wrestling and real sports. It was kind of funny. Like, I remember, like, probably like 2 years ago now, I was on WrestleNomics and we were talking about like Stephanie McMahon made this point about like WWE and being like, we're sports programming, but we can control the outcomes, which other sports can't do, which means that every game, could end in a Hail Mary or a last second shot or anything like that. And I was like, and that was like, she was arguing that as like a selling point for pro wrestling and WWE because we're like sports, but we'll guarantee that there's a great, exciting game every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you fucking idiot. Like, that's the exact opposite of why sports are interesting. Sports are interesting because there are blowouts, because there are games that are not particularly competitive, which puts in contrast to the other games. And it's like if
Yeah,
you
if
do that,
every game ended, it's a classic example. Going back to
yeah,
basketball, the Elam ending was this thing that everybody decided, oh my god, this is the new revolution in
mhm.
basketball. Is that every single game is going to end on a game-winning shot? You know what I mean? Like no matter what, because of the Elam ending, like the game will end, a shot will happen, and then the game will end, and that will be exciting and interesting and fun or whatever. And they did it for the NBA All-Star game, and they do it for the basketball tournament or whatever, that TBT thing. But then you realize, like, after the ninth time seeing an Elam ending, you're like, I don't really care. You know what I mean? Like, a game-winning shot means less because you see a game-winning shot all the time now, and you're like, wait a minute, organic game-winning shots are 1,000 times better than, okay, now here comes the game-winning shot. You know what I mean? Like, if college football playoffs are super exciting, but I always thought they were a little bit more exciting when it wasn't, okay, here we go, now we're gonna do our weird, not really the same game we've been playing, we're gonna do this series of downs, and you lose a little bit of that. Yeah, so if every NFL game ended, they blew a whistle and said, all right, Hail Mary tournament now, let's see who wins. Like, that would suck. That would be really, really bad. But yeah, so to and that's, I think, one of the fun things about professional wrestling in the older days and the classic days, and what my idealized version of pro wrestling would be, is that yes, you can have the Hail Mary ending, but you got to make sure it's the right story, and not like you said, not every single thing has to end with that, the big blow off or whatever. But you could say, okay, this is a moment that really warrants it, so let's do it. Here's the time where we throw that Hail Mary or have that amazing game-winning shot or whatever. And that's where a lot of the emotion comes from, is you could tell that, okay, this story is a little different, this story is being told a little bit different, and the people involved, they've nailed this story from beginning to end. Now they just have to get that last second shot or whatever that would, and that's what makes it really cool. But yeah, forcing that to every single story, I feel like has a lot of diminishing returns. And that's kind of my wonder about the WWE product right now, is every single story in that company right now is a group of people come together and don't trust each other. Like Alpha Academy, I talked about them a little bit earlier. They were together as like a unit on the same page for like literally like 2 weeks. And then immediately it was, Otis is looking at Chad with, weird eyes, and Maxine is shivering with fear because Chad's being mean to her. And I was like, we're already doing that. These guys have been a unit for like 2 weeks, and we're already doing that. And then they got like 5 months out of that, for God's sakes. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
they
oh
just
my
drag
God.
it. It's the
And
counterpoint to
Judgment
like,
Day. I mean,
yeah, it's just
Judgment Day
dragged out
never
forever
felt
and
like they
ever.
were on the same page. It always was like, every time I watched Judgment Day, they were in the back, and Rhea's going, "We gotta focus, guys." Or
Remember, it
David
was an
Priest being like,
Edge. It was an Edge group, and then they kicked Edge out.
right, right. So I do wonder if there's that law of diminishing returns, that if every single story is the same story, eventually will people say, hey, wait a minute, every single story is the same story. I keep hoping that's going to happen, but we may have reached a point where that's all that people want, is just a very clean, easy to understand story every single time with the same people doing the same things over and over again. Like it boggles my mind, but fuck you. Look at, like you said, look at the attendance, look at the ratings, look at the merch sales, look at all that stuff. It's clearly, it hasn't hit its expiration point yet at all.
Yeah, and I think, like, I think we'll go back and look at this as a almost like, even though it already even though the company had already fully gone full steam ahead with this philosophy, I do almost think that this is a key. This will be a key match to study, and that's the night 2 of WrestleMania this year. In what that match was, which was a not particularly interesting bell to bell wrestling match, but was entirely built around like the Royal Rumble entrances, right? Like,
Yeah, pops. Yeah,
first
music
the
and pops.
Bloodline guys are going to come out, then like John Cena comes out, and then The Rock comes out, and then the Undertaker comes out, like just kind of randomly for no reason. But it was about matches. It was about moments in the crowd standing on their feet and going, "Oh my God, the Undertaker's tongue hit!" And that is what the current WWE fan base wants. People saw that as like a satisfying conclusion to WrestleMania and Cody winning the title. Um, it was what the WWE fan that they have cultivated wants. And it was like the perfect ending to WrestleMania for that fan base. And now I think we're going to see that more and more happen. We saw that like SummerSlam. And I said this from, weeks and weeks ago. It ended up unfolding exactly the way I thought it was, which was like this entire SummerSlam main event is just based around Roman's music hitting and him coming out.
Yeah.
That's like the match itself means almost nothing. And, people are interested in going to this show and sitting, waiting for Roman's music to hit so they
While
can
having their phone in their hand,
Yeah,
record
and it
themselves
is
reacting to Roman coming out.
yeah. I'll touch on that in a second because I think that's almost something else. But like it is, I don't know how to evaluate it. Like it's hugely impressive for Roman's sake that like people will he can essentially be the focus of a 50,000 person attended wrestling show just to like make an appearance.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't have to wrestle a big match. He doesn't have to be on any of like the pre like in the SmackDowns and Raws leading up to the show. He doesn't need to be announced for the show. But everyone knew that he was going to come out, and that's all those fans cared about.
Absolutely. Which I think also, not to interrupt, but I think it is a hallmark of Paul Levesque WWE that maybe is a little different than Vince McMahon, is that he's not openly antagonistic to his fan base as well. Everybody in that building knew that Roman Reigns was going to come out. They knew Roman Reigns was going to come out. They didn't tell you it was going to come out, but everybody knew it was going to come out. Vince, in some of those cases, would say, fuck them. I'm not giving them that. They're going to have to wait. And, but
look,
Paul just went with the obvious story. It's like, fucking yeah. Everyone knows Roman's going to come out. Hit the fucking music. Let's do this,
No, Levesque has delivered, which is really important, I think, when we talk about like the original bump of like people being interested in the WWE product again once Vince was gone, because they had been turned off by Vince's booking and Vince's open, resentment for what the fans wanted. And Levesque doesn't have that relationship, and he's done well in doing the things necessary to maintain that relationship and that optimism that the fans have that he's going to deliver on their expectations. They got through, they didn't put Cody over at WrestleMania the first time, which I think was a decision that was maybe out of Paul's hands in terms of who wanted to go over there. But, they did get back to it. They did deliver the desired outcome of WrestleMania Night 2, which was Cody finally winning the title. Like even things like, there were the rumors that CM Punk was going to come back to the company, and he delivered. He got CM Punk back into the company. So he has done that enough times to maintain that faith that fans have in him, which is really important to maintaining their interest in the product, because they believe that they're going to get the kind of results that are interesting to them. And that was, I guess like the latest example of that. But it was telling that like the entire match and the entire show in a lot of ways was based around that happening. It wasn't about a match. It wasn't about who was going to win a title. It was about a guy who's been around for like 15 years showing up.
Yeah.
Um,
And it might be a dangerous game. And that's, something that Joe and I have been exploring over the last couple of weeks on the flagship is that a dangerous game that they're playing, that the bell rings and the fans sit down. The bell rings and the fans don't care. And they basically, and we saw it in SummerSlam. That was the perfect example of it in SummerSlam. Cody and Solo come out and everyone's going nuts for every little beat of every little, entrance thing. And Cody's doing his thing.
Sorry, can I just interrupt for a second? Did
Yeah.
you read the Observer this week? Did you read Dave's recap of that match?
I have not. No, I did not.
Dave said that match was never slow.
Well, then he was watching on 2x speed, because that thing was slow.
Solo put on a nerve hold for
Yeah,
like 2 minutes.
to no crowd reaction. It was like watching WrestleMania 5 or whatever. It was like, oh boy, this is not, No, yeah, he put on a nerve hold while nobody made any noise. And I think that was the dangerous part about that, is the fans knew, okay, this bell's going to ring and this match is going to happen, but nothing is going to matter until another bloodline guy comes out, until Yeet Uso comes out, and then ultimately until Roman Reigns comes out.
Yeah.
So you know
It
what?
was the same thing during the WrestleMania main event.
Yeah,
too.
absolutely. It was like, we know that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I said one
Bloodline
of the big things.
rules. The Rock
Yeah.
is going to get involved.
Right.
We're just
You
waiting
knew
for
that, Cody hitting a hip toss and going for a pinfall 5 minutes into the match, no one's going to react to that.
You're just
fall. No one's
waiting.
gonna
You're
give a
waiting
fuck.
for
Yeah.
Dick Togo to come out with the Garrote Wire. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, that was
yeah.
the wrong company.
Well, but similar vibes though, in some ways. But yeah, and that's I don't know if that's a dangerous game or not. I think it's something that we should explore. Is that, to me, like I said, the in-ring matters less than ever, because that bell rings and those fans sit down. And those fans don't cheer for near falls. Those fans don't cheer for moves. They will maybe wait until a wrestler goes to the corner and tells them to do whatever their thing is. Like Jey Uso will tell them to yeet, and then they'll yeet. But then once they're done yeeting, they all sit down again because they don't really care what happens. I mean, fuck. The Uso match at WrestleMania is one of to me the best example of that. Is, I mean, God, that thing was molten hot on the entrance. And then the bell rang, and then these guys went out there and had a very boring match that the fans didn't care about. And ultimately, it ended with like, holy crap, what was that? That was horrible. Like, those guys had no idea, other than we make an entrance and then I yeet occasionally. And then I don't know what else we're going to do. I don't know. That's it. That's all. That's the only idea we have. And that's what it felt like.
How did twin brothers like not have like ideas for the match when they wrestled?
I know. They've been wrestling for like 15 years. It's like, you would think this would be like their time, where they've been thinking about this match their entire lives, and thinking of, oh man, once we get in the ring together, like, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that. But this is what I mean, where that's just not really how things are done. And that's, the Cody and Solo match was a perfect example. It's the main event of SummerSlam. Bell rings, everybody sits down, and they don't make any noise at all. Those fans made no noise, did not care about anything in that match happening until they started hitting the entrance music. And then they realized, oh, okay, cool. Now here's the point that we're going to get. So you had a little bit of that 90s Nitro vibe, where everybody stands up and looks to the entranceway and says, okay, here comes the Giant, here comes Sting, here comes Hulk Hogan, here comes the NWO. Like, nothing matters in this match until people start coming out. And that was a dangerous game that Nitro played that eventually kind of killed their main events. Will the same happen with WWE, or have they simply decided that that's what their fans want and that they will deliver? So, hey, you're going to have to endure, 11 minutes of these guys pretending they're wrestling, but don't worry, we'll start hitting entrance music very soon, and then your favorites will come out. So just wait.
Like how long, like in the long term, how sustainable is that as a practice? And
yeah,
I don't know. I think part of it is it's okay because they do it infrequently enough, so it's not going to get quick. Like it's not quite like Nitro, where it's like every single week on Nitro. That's like the formula. This is like,
exactly. Yeah.
Maybe it's only on big shows, so that will mean that it will take a lot longer for it to kind of seek in as repetitive. I found the reaction to SummerSlam interesting. and the kind of the same groups of people that we were talking about earlier is not necessarily like the super hardcore WWE fans. These are the fans that maybe have come back to the product in the last few years. Um, I thought, and you can read this in some of the cage match reviews. You can usually, if you actually read the cage match reviews, you can usually tell someone's general like approach to pro wrestling and whether or not they're just going to slap 10 on everything or whether or not they're going to be more thoughtful.
Yeah, or if they
It,
had
it,
AI write their review
yeah,
for them, which
yeah.
is very clear. Sometimes we're like, this
But
game was quite magical. You're
it's
like, okay,
yeah,
yeah.
it seemed like a general consensus was that people that was at SummerSlam, delivered moments to them in terms of turns and returns and things like that. But the bell to bell of the show was not interesting. And so the show itself got kind of mediocre reviews. It
That's what I
wasn't
got from my
like,
casual fan friends too. A
yeah,
lot
it
of them
wasn't
said like,
like,
"Oh yeah, the turns were cool and the return, Roman came back." But then I said, "Well, what'd you think of the wrestling?" And they went, yeah, it was kind of there wasn't any really
yeah,
good
it
matches on
wasn't
the
like the
show."
show of the year. It wasn't really getting show of the year buzz, even amongst like hardcore WWE fans.
Right.
It was a show that people were like, yeah, I liked, the stories that unfolded, but it wasn't like largely interesting bell to bell, which is still, even if you're a company that's super resentful of that being a part of pro wrestling, is still the meat and potatoes of the company. In the you're gonna fill hours of time on a pay per view doing this stuff, and it does speak to the kind of sustainability of like if you really teach everyone that like the matches themselves don't matter until people hit the ring or wins and losses don't really matter, it's hard to present a wrestling product that's going to be compelling week in and week out if people just aren't entertained by the
Hmm.
physical actions going on at all. Then you really might just be like Vince Russo's like era where it's like we don't even need to have wrestlers, we'll just have
Right.
acting. And at that
Yeah,
point,
I'm
why?
worried about. I'm
What
very
is
worried we're getting there.
pro
it's
wrestling?
it's
Yeah,
rapidly approaching. I'm very worried about that because that's always something I remember laughing about, like openly laughing about, and everybody openly laughed about. You know what I mean? Most when I was coming up in the wrestling, on wrestling message boards and stuff, everybody
Mhm.
laughed at that idea that Vince Russo said, "Oh, you don't need wrestlers. I could just hire actors." And it's like, fuck, man, I
I'm
don't know.
sure.
We're
I'm sure TKO would be love it if they don't have to. They can just
absolutely. Are
not
you
hire
kidding? Yeah.
wrestlers.
As long as they're not SAG actors, yeah, they'd have to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
non-SAG actors, and then they'd maybe be okay with it.
Well, they have them. They have these NIL and ex-college
Yeah,
athletes that they have learning the WWA, and it doesn't really matter if they can't wrestle that well or project that well or anything like that, because the glitz and glamour will get them there. And um, that fan base, the WWE fan base, has a real level of optimism about the product.
yeah.
And it's they like to buy in, which is really, really important in terms of
That's
it's
the
really
best
like
thing
the
you can have.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
and
the
that's
whole
that's not a
focus of a
negative.
yeah, it's the whole focus of a booker, right? Is to get the audience to buy
Yeah,
into what you're doing. And they don't need that much they don't need to be shown that much to start buying in. They just need a catchphrase and an entrance and maybe some well-placed social media campaigns. And then
absolutely. Yeah, the best thing you can have, and that's something that AEW once had. If we want to slowly get into AEW here, is
yeah.
AEW used to have the thing where everybody bought in, and that was a criticism of some people. Is hey, we can do anything and the fans love it. Yeah, that's great. That's what you want. That means you've cultivated an audience that trusts you, that appreciates you, that you're in lockstep with. There's nothing better if you're a wrestling promoter than anything we do. The fans love. They're bought in. That's good. That's what you want. So I'm never going to criticize that because I think that's exactly what the goal of a booker should be, is to cultivate a fan base that just is in complete lockstep with everything you
So
do,
Paul Levesque
and
Booker of
gives
the
you
Year is what we're talking here. That's the
exactly
argument we're
lock
making.
it
Yeah.
in, baby, lock it in. I mean, honestly, I mean,
I mean, yeah, I
I'd
mean,
probably
like if we're voting it the way Dave does, like
yeah, it's I mean
who has the most faith and trust from his audience and who's able
exactly
to get his product over with his fan base to the degree that they're going to turn into paying customers to tune in and to buy merchandise and to buy tickets and stuff like that.
right. I don't have to like it to objectively look at it and say, well, fuck, man,
Yeah.
that's probably Paul
I,
Levesque right
I
now, and
think yeah,
hope
we can shift to AEW because I think and on the note, I think the key distinction between AEW and WWE in that regard is that AEW by its very nature is going to attract a uh, a more hardcore fan demographic. At the very least, you're attracting fans who are not totally satisfied with WWE, because if they were totally satisfied by WWE, they wouldn't, need they wouldn't waste their time trying to find another product out there. And so when that is your fan base, you're talking about people that are naturally approaching wrestling from a little bit more of a critical perspective, that are going to be more aware of inefficiencies in your product because they were aware enough of the inefficiencies in WWE's product to seek out something else.
Mhm.
And it's naturally harder, I think, to get those fans to completely buy in, as opposed to the more casual, less critically insightful um, WWE fans who are going to look. Like I always say, like WWE shot their biggest angle of the year in February when the Cody Rhodes came out and said, "The Rock is more important than me. He's going to challenge Roman Reigns for the title at WrestleMania." And The Rock came out and that was their biggest angle of the year, which was Cody, letting The Rock take his chance at WrestleMania instead of Cody. And the fans got really mad about that. And what did WWE do? They literally erased that episode of SmackDown from
Right.
canon.
It does. It did not exist in any of they
Like
completely retconned it to the
the
point where,
biggest angle that they've shot in years, Rich. They just erased that from
mhm.
happening. How did the WWE fans react to that?
They were fine with it.
Yeah. Okay. AEW couldn't do that. So I just, as an example of just like, these are companies that have to cater to their fans in a different way. And I think when we compare the two in terms of like their enthusiasm for the product, the WWE fans are definitely way more enthused about the product than AEW fans. But I think once we got past the honeymoon phase with AEW, it was kind of always destined to be like that, because I think by the very nature, the AEW fans are naturally way more critical of the wrestling product that they're going to watch. And that doesn't mean that there's not good reasons for the AEW fans to have become more cynical about the decision making going on in the company and what's going to happen with the product and things like that. But I think if we're going to compare the two, it's much much more difficult for Tony and AEW to put out a product that's going to satisfy everybody. It's really, not to get too political here, Rich, but this is really the Democratic Party being a big tent and the Republican Party shrinking into being more of a small tent,
Yeah.
where
No, for sure.
like AEW has the equivalent of like the the centrists and the far lefts and the anarchists are trying to like all fit in wrestling version, or like the shoot people and the people that want just a slightly better WWE version, which would be like the centrists, and the people that love hardcore wrestling, and the people that love women's wrestling, and the people that want lucha, the people that love puro. Like all these people are trying to like project what they want to AEW, and it's impossible for the one company to satisfy all those needs.
Absolutely. No,
Just like
I
how
think
it's
that's absolutely
impossible,
fair.
just like how it's impossible for like any Democratic single politician to have a consistent platform that caters to the entire people that would identify as leftists.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like you have half the people that are all in on socialism, and you also have part of the Democratic Party that's very centrist, and it's like somehow we have to get these
Yeah, the
people
people that just don't want to vote for Trump, essentially. And
right. That
like,
we need to get these people into one pocket, but they philosophically are completely different people. But
yeah, they fought over Tim Waltz this week about like the
right,
like
right.
who is Tim Waltz? Is he really like a leftist progressive person, or is he really like a centrist? And like, which probably means he was a good pick because people are trying to fight over who he is. But like, it's just, I think it's AEW is never gonna like universally get along. They're not gonna have all the people that are just sticking the finger in the air. That was maybe true during the honeymoon period where people were just so excited to see a different non WWE product, but the company is largely different than it was then, and
Oh, absolutely.
it was never going to remain like that. And I think
No,
that's
no, and I'm watching a lot of
yeah,
the old pay-per-views right now. I'm doing a series on flagshippatreon.com right now, going back and looking at old AEW pay-per-views and kind of following along the progression of AEW, looking at the news at the time, and it was largely a company that when it first started was built, on the backs of the elite. Like and Dave had a really good analysis in one of the old observers at that time, looking at the people that were purchasing tickets and purchasing pay-per-views to AEW shows were like completely different fans. They were like completely new, interested. They weren't people that were watching WWE at that time, or they weren't, actively purchasing WWE stuff at the time. They weren't really, they weren't engaged WWE fans, but they also kind of weren't that engaged of, ROH fans or New Japan fans. They were just kind of this weird group of people that were like either Last fans or people that followed Being the Elite, or people that were just like, you know what? Finally wrestling that's not Vince McMahon. Let me try this out, and let's see what it is. And it was never going to remain that. It was always going to have to adapt and evolve. And I think, like you said, what happened over the last couple of years with AEW is, particularly in 2021 when they got big, is that you kind of took all these different groups of fans and all smashed them together. You said, hey, New Japan fans, come here, we have something for you. Hey, Lucha fans, come here, we have something for you. Hey, hardcore indie wrestling fans, we have something for you. Hey, WWE fans that don't like WWE anymore, hey, we have something for you. Oh, and we also have CM Punk, and we also have Bryan Danielson. It was all this smashed together, and it was like, holy fuck, this is incredible. But you were never going to please all those different people. And they've largely, those kind of quote unquote Being the Elite fans, I mean, that's long gone. Those kind of fans that came in because they like the Young Bucks and Kenny and those guys, they're pretty much gone, at this point. And I don't even know if those fans exist. They probably evolved and moved on because, the power of Being the Elite. I mean, that seems like, if I say Being the Elite to you, doesn't that sound like that's from like 15 years ago, where you're like, oh yeah, Being the Elite, that was a thing, right? That was huge. I mean, that's why AEW was built largely on that YouTube show and on selling T-shirts or whatever. That seems like so long time ago. Pro wrestling tees and Being the Elite is why AEW is created.
Yeah,
And it feels like that feels like so long ago. That was 5 years ago.
Yeah. I would say like, yeah, being the Elite, which is like essentially like these guys getting their own characters over with basically no infrastructure from anyone else. Is very much like do it yourself. Like, hey, we're just gonna make a vlog. It's gonna be like we're gonna show some real stuff, but we're also gonna be playing characters and trying to get some of our angles over and things like that. It does feel like a foreign concept compared to it today, but it was always going to be like that. They got, they were multi-hundred, I don't know, they're a $1 billion evaluated company or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah, but I do also think that one of the issues with AEW is that I don't know, like they have evolved in terms of their fan base has evolved, but I don't know if they've evolved in terms of the infrastructure from when they began as we're Twitter Being the Elite, like that's kind of our thing or whatever. And the media landscape in the last 5 years has greatly changed. I mean, I think we can all admit that the media landscape is just a completely different thing than it was 5 years ago, and it'll be a completely different thing in the next 5 years as well. And it does feel like AEW is still very much stuck in a 2019 ideal of what the media landscape should be like, and where you should be and what you should say in those different points. Whereas I think WWE has done a much better job of evolving to the quote unquote TikTok generation or whatever you want to call it, and that sort of entire generation of people. And it does feel like AEW still largely believes, oh, okay, what we did when we, were created in 2019, that's kind of still what we should be focused on and doing. And I think that they haven't really updated their kind of marketing strategy or anything like that, or the way, because they're still, AEW more than any other company is still very focused on Twitter. Like they love Twitter. AEW, they think that Twitter is where people are, where wrestling fans are. And yeah, there's wrestling fans on Twitter or whatever, but man, you need to have I don't know anymore.
No, no, I was a joke because now the wrestling fans that are on Twitter are those people that you want to have as your fans.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's interesting that I know, and I know for a fact that Tony Khan still feels that Twitter is the place where they, and how many matches are announced on Twitter, how many things, videos, promos, all these sort of things are on Twitter. And it's like, I mean, Twitter should be one part of your media strategy, but man, you look at WWE, and obviously WWE is going to have a way bigger media infrastructure than AEW does, but maybe to that point, AEW should have more of that. But WWE is like, they're going to hit you from every fucking direction on every single media platform, on every single thing, and work that game a lot better than AEW, which, like you said, grew on DIY, grew on Being the Elite, being this kind of fun behind the scenes pseudo DIY YouTube show, and largely Pro Wrestling Tees and Twitter was kind of how AEW, began and rose up through the ranks or whatever. And I don't know that they've necessarily figured out how to kind of evolve past that the way their company has evolved, because the company absolutely has evolved into not appealing to those same fans, but still largely feel like they're trying to appeal to those same fans in the way that their media strategy is kind of laid out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of let me ask you this, because I think this is a big part of WWE's turnaround. and we talked about this um, a little bit earlier, but WWE, the idea of going to a the first, my major difference between like AEW when I first started and WWE when I first started was AEW's fan base was super engaged with almost everyone on the roster. Like, I go to an AEW show, and some guys are more over than others, but pretty much everyone, even the mid card acts, are getting pops. People are singing their entrance music. Like, there's an investment in, if you're going to go back, this is like, Darby Allin or Jungle Boy or those kind of people, the Acclaimed. And you compare that to WWE, and it's like, yeah, like the top guys in WWE are over, but like, if you were to go to a show, it just feels like such a drag. Like, most of the wrestlers aren't over. People don't really care what happens. And I do think that, especially with Levesque taking over, like, the fans are way more energetic, and it seems like a WWE show is a fun place to go to
Yeah.
a fan. And my experience at AEW fan as an AEW fan has remained consistent. I don't know about you, but like every time I go to an AEW show, I'm like, yeah, pretty much like everyone's over. Like, people, are getting into stuff that when the match, even if maybe the crowd might start a little cold, but some guys do some cool stuff, the crowd gets into it. I have no real issue with the AEW fans in the buildings, um, in terms of, I still feel like they have a real positive vibe about the product. That's
Yeah,
different
it's kind
online.
of it's been a little different when I've gone as of late.
Yeah, you're
It
with all those
was
hardcore Chicago smarts,
yeah, you
though.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I am,
Well,
and
and
yeah,
that's a whole other dynamic because of the whole CM Punk thing. But yeah.
right. Yeah, I think that plays a little bit of a part of it too. But yeah, I mean, AEW used to own Chicago. Like that used to be the town for AEW, even prior to CM Punk, because obviously with
Yeah.
the first All In being there, that was like the place where
It's
it was like, oh, we really
essentially
put our
Tony's hometown.
exactly, yeah.
I know
And
he's from
Tony tries to
Champaign, but yeah.
yeah, but no, but his dad lives in Chicago in a giant high rise or whatever. That's why every people are always like,
Can you
why are they
see
running?
his dad from your Voice of Wrestling office? Like, can you see
I
the
do,
shot?
yeah. Me
Okay.
and Shad, we go to similar places for lunch, and we cross paths, and I talk about our cars and our super yachts and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I could see him from the high rise. We wave at each other, we give the thumbs up or whatnot. But he and that's why EW people are always wondering like, why are they running Chicago the day before Thanksgiving? Why are they running Chicago on like Christmas Eve or whatever? It's like, well, July 3rd. It's like, well, because then the show ends and Tony can just walk to his dad's,
Well, it's also, and they
condo.
also always drew. They always drew in
They
Chicago too.
did, yeah,
Just
yeah,
like,
and
why are
so
they
they
always
own the
running this
city.
place that they always draw and always have
Yeah,
hot
right, right,
crowds in?
right.
They should be. And, well, that's a. I was from a place that, like, when AEW first started, and this is related to crowds. When AEW first started, they were like really conservative in where they went, in terms of, they pretty much exclusively seemed to be taping in like big cities on like the East Coast and the Midwest, and like a little bit into the South.
Yeah, they never went
Yeah,
to the West Coast. Remember until like what was it? 2022 was like the
yeah.
first West Coast show they'd ever did.
And for whatever reason, now, like the last like year or two, but really the last year, like, they are like every single like top 300 metro area they can go into. They are running in. I know they were in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, I think on Wednesday night. They are in they're in Bossier City, Louisiana. They're in these really like uh out there places.
Yeah, Little
Um
Rock or what was it? North Little Rock and
yeah,
Greenville,
well,
South Carolina.
Little
It's like
Rock, I can kind of see, but like it used to be like, remember when they were just like basically like, we're going to Chicago, Philly, Boston, New York, Pittsburgh, like,
yeah,
what was
and then
DC?
Jacksonville, for
Yeah,
our Daily's Place things as kind
yeah.
of our small shows, but then otherwise, yeah, we're
Atlanta, like, they were pretty much only going to, like, what I would call, like, pro sports towns, and now they are going all over the place, and I do think that might impact the crowds a little bit. Not entirely, I still feel like the crowds are still, like, relatively hot for the guys, but, like, I think it's a different when you're in a Chicago or a New York or a Philadelphia or a Boston, compared to some of these smaller communities that I don't think you're getting it. It's a slightly different fan base. Not entirely
yeah.
different, but it's a little
No,
different.
it definitely is, and I've seen the crowds kind of evolve a little bit over the years, and I know the last couple Chicago shows I've been to have been pretty. The attendance has definitely lessened by a lot, by tremendous amounts from where they were in 2019 and then 2020 and then obviously post pandemic where they were. But
Mhm.
the heat is still okay. But I do think that and this is probably something that I do think they have done better job of the last couple of months or whatever. And I do hope is kind of a strategy that AEW does moving forward, because like you said, there used to be this party atmosphere. I'm going to AEW and I'm going to go there with 10,000 people or 8,000 people or 7,000 people. We're gonna have a great time. We're gonna go, and it's gonna be a big party.
And it's a great way to introduce people who are not familiar with the
Yeah,
product.
oh, absolutely. I used to have a lot of non-wrestling fans come. Yeah, there would be a lot of times where I'd bring a friend and I'd be like, no, you don't know anything, but who cares? You're gonna have a lot of fun. And they all did. They all had a great time every single time, because everybody's over, everyone's cheering, everyone's going nuts, everyone's doing that sort of stuff. So it was great.
It's this
and
contradicting the idea that like you can only push big guys and you have to tell stories and all this bullshit.
As long as it's fun and people are going nuts, and people will have people enjoy it. But one of the things that I've noticed, the last couple times I've gone to shows, is that when you go to these buildings and it feels empty and half the arena's tarped off and the upper deck's tarped off and a section is tarped off, it doesn't feel like you're in this fun atmosphere anymore. It feels like, okay, here we are watching this wrestling show and we can have a good, but it doesn't feel like I'm a part of something. It doesn't feel like I'm a part of a hot product or something that's really fun or something that's really engaging. And that's something that I think that AEW kind of got caught in doing this thing where 2021 they were getting hot, but they were still running these small buildings. WCW did the same thing. You go back and watch like peak Nitros.
Yeah, they're like in like Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Yeah, they're in the quad. I always do the mark of the Quad Cities, and you're like, what the fuck? Why are they at the mark of the Quad Cities? And it's like Sting and Hogan, and you're like, what? They're selling 5,000 tickets to this show, and they're the hottest.
On television. I think like the NWO sold out pay-per-view. Like the NWO themed.
Yeah, that's from the Mark of the Quad Cities, I believe, right?
Is it? Yeah, I remember there being. It has like the Eddie Guerrero, Sean Waltman ladder match.
Yeah, and you could see like the back wall of the building, and you're like, "What the hell are they doing?"
I was like, "This is like peak WCW, like peak NWO, where they had an entire pay-per-view named after them, and it wasn't running like even like at least they would be running like Atlanta or Charlotte. It's like, we're in like a city that, like you said, Quad Cities."
So I think they get caught in that situation where in 2021, it's like, shit, we're hot, but we kind of already booked all these smaller buildings and these smaller college arenas and this sort of stuff. But I think it was a great idea when they first started is, hey, let's run these smaller, unique venues, these college arenas, and sell 5,000 tickets or 4,000 tickets or 6,000 tickets or whatever, and just have the place be full. And it's fine. We're not selling out 10,000 seat arenas or whatever, but who cares? We're doing these smaller venues. It's hot. People are enjoying it. And then as 2021 came, they had to kind of evolve that a little bit and say, okay, let's start booking bigger buildings because the demand is there and we can do that. And that worked for a little bit. They were booking big buildings and doing very good numbers on those. But like WCW started to do, midway through 1999, WCW was still booking the big basketball arenas across the country, but now little by little. I mean, they had that one show.
They were at like the TWA Dome.
That was the exact one I was going to bring up. There's an infamous like TWA Dome where they had like 3,000 people in this thing that could seat 60,000 people, and it's like
Al
Jesus
Snow
Christ.
booking that show,
right? Exactly. But it was like they got caught in a weird position where like early 1999 they're hot as hell, so let's book out the rest of the year, and we'll go here, and we'll go here, and we'll go here, we'll go here, we'll go all these big basketball arenas. The problem is though, then you're coming to these arenas and you're now don't feel like you're part of something cool and unique, and you don't feel like you're in a party atmosphere because you're one of 3,000 people in this cavernous arena or whatever. And I do think that is something that AEW maybe caught themselves doing a little bit earlier this year and in late last year, where now we're booking the big hockey / basketball arena in every single town, but we have to tarp off the upper deck, but we have to tarp off a section of it. And I think that makes fans inherently not as excited about what they're seeing. Even if they do like what's happening, even if they are popping, it doesn't feel like, you don't feel like you're part of this party atmosphere anymore because you're in this cavernous arena. And that's where something like the Arlington residency and other stuff like that, I think would really serve AEW well moving forward, is get back that idea that I'm one of, 6,000, 5,000, 4,000, 3,000 people here, and we're all here and we're all having a good time. I think that will make it a better, I know maybe financially it doesn't make as much sense. I don't know. I think you could charge decent tickets, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the books. I can't see that. And you know what? If you can't bring your giant LED boards and all that sort of stuff, I don't know. Too bad. Like I think it's more important to have people go to a show and feel like you said, that party atmosphere more so than, well, we got to book the big basketball arena in the town, and okay, we have only 4,000 tickets sold, but that's fine. We'll just tarp off the upper decks. Like that makes you feel like you're watching something that's not as hot or as cool. And I think largely AEW product is still pretty damn cool and is pretty. There's obviously I have some criticisms here and there, but I think that they have done a very good job of morphing all these different fan bases into this thing that is AEW, and I think it would serve them well to have it feel like you're going to a show and having a really, really good time again. And really that, again, that party atmosphere is probably the best way to put it. And I do think that they suffered, getting caught booking these big basketball arenas when the demand wasn't there. And now it might be a good time to kind of reel back on that a little bit and go back to your college arenas and these little, tinier or, smaller arenas, I should say, and just try to sell those out and make it, more of a fun atmosphere to go to a show.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think there was this toxic attitude, and I know Dave was big on this in terms of like you got to be in the A arena to be the A town. If you're running these
Yeah,
cities, you want to be in the
that
A
sucks.
arena
That's
to look
stupid.
major league, which I understand the logic being used there. I don't know how true that is, especially when you're talking about the difference between going to like a lively, sold out 4,000 seat venue as opposed to a 4,000 seat and a 16,000 seat venue. That almost definitely costs more money.
Well, and it hurt the demand as well, because I know from somebody that was buying AEW tickets from day one, is it was like, shit, I got to get my ticket right now when they're coming to town, because those things are going to sell out in a second. Like if I don't buy my ticket now, there's only 4,000 seats or whatever. I got to do that. Now it's like you can wait until the day of the show.
Mhm.
And I don't think you ever want fans to be able to wait until the day of a show to buy a ticket, because something's going to come up, or they'll make other plans, or they'll just say, you know what? Nah, I don't feel like it. Or the weather's not good. Or, you don't want to create that. You want to have it when tickets are on sale today. There's only 5,000 tickets. Buy it right now. And you would just say, fuck, I got to buy these tickets. And you're going to go to that show because you bought the tickets already. Whereas if it's like, I'll wait and see what the sale is. I'll wait and see if they do buy one, get one free. I'll wait and see if I can get a promo code. I'll wait and see. And then the day comes and you might, like I said, any thousands of things. Anybody who lives an adult life knows that you can have the plans of, hey, on Thursday, I'm going to go do this thing. And then Thursday comes and you're like, oh, God, I'm annoyed, or work was hard, or I don't feel like coming, so screw it. I'm just not going to go. I wouldn't. So yeah, I always rejected that idea that you have to run, if you're going to be the quote unquote major league, you have to run the A buildings. I don't believe that. I think, do what is going to placate your fan base and do what's going to make you feel and look like a hot promotion. Don't give a fuck about these odd ideals of what you need to do to be an A product or whatever, or a top company or a competitor or whatever. And that goes to a lot of, I think the philosophical stuff with AEW that, you and I have talked about before on this show, and I know you've discussed a lot, is I always reject this idea that like if you're second, you're last or whatever, because that's kind of what people do. Is it's like we're still stuck in this fucking Monday Night Wars mentality that Eric Bischoff had that led to his company going out of fucking business. Is that if we're second, we're last, and it's like, no, you can be second. Like second, there's nothing wrong with being second. Second is fine. And Dave has this idea that, if you're second, you're going to go out of business. And well, yes, if you're Eric Bischoff and you're an idiot, if you're TNA and you can't handle that, but it's like, no, you can just say, if our TV partners like us and we're selling tickets and we're selling pay-per-views, who fucking cares that we're second?
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to catch WWE.
No. They got kind of closer than they ever probably should have, mostly because of Vince McMahon being an idiot. But you know what? Like, you got close.
Well, like,
but
no, they never, Rich. But the thing is, they never got close. Even when they were tied, or there's a couple Dynamites that beat Raw in the 18-49 and stuff like that. Like, even though that's just one rating.
That's ratings
like,
bullshit. Yeah.
WWE is making was 13 times higher revenue. Like, they were never close. They were maybe close in like ratings bullshit conversations, but like the idea that they were close to WWE is like, no, you're not going to beat WWE. And I mean, there's something to the perception of which company is hot, which company is not. But I feel like that is a discussion that's held by like analysts that isn't held by the average fan.
Yeah.
I think even like no fan is like, oh, well, Raw's attendance is way up than Dynamite, so I'm going to go to Raw instead. Maybe they go to both shows and like, oh, this one feels a lot more lively because there's 10,000 people here instead of 3,000 people. But I agree with you totally on the arena choice things. I think I want to say John Muse told me this. It might have been someone else, but I'm pretty sure it was him. But he said something once where it was like, like AEW's product is largely a television product in terms of where the revenue is coming from. And the focus should be what is going to look good on television. Is it going to be the 12,000 seat venue or that's got 4,000 people in there? Or is it going to be the 4,000 seat venue that has 4,000 people in there? What's going to be a louder building? What's going to give you better visuals when you're like panning across and showing everyone jammed up to the top seats and no empty seats anywhere. Like, it's obviously going to be the smaller venue that you can fill as opposed to the bigger venue, which
Of
maybe you
course.
can sell slightly more tickets to, but you're not going to come close to filling. And really, that should be your focus, which should be what is going to come across the best on television. I guess some people would say like, "Oh, you like the big arena because you can show like the big arena," but if you're not putting people in
Yeah, I
those
mean,
seats,
it's
who
great if you have
cares?
20,000 people there, but if you
Yeah,
have 4,000, I don't really, there's no benefit to that.
yeah. And I think, but I wanted to touch like on like the AEW, um, like in ring changes, if there have been any. I think it's less obvious than in WWE, and I also think that AEW has less of a patterned style than WWE, so it's harder to notice. Like, AEW will do really wide ranging types of matches, and they still do that. They'll have a lucha match, they'll have a garbage wrestling hardcore match, they'll have a pure technical match. They'll do so. It's. I don't think that their in ring philosophy has changed that much. I know you and Joe are big on uh, like the more sports entertainment creative aspect leaking into the in ring, which is problematic.
Yeah, I think they still give you that very good variety, which is one of the things that I love about the. One of the best things to look at is AEW's pay-per-views, despite fluctuations in ratings and attendance and all that sort of stuff. The surest bet, though, is still the AEW pay-per-view. People buy tickets to those, knowing I'll buy, and they can run big buildings and get very good numbers for all those. Is that, hey, I'm going to buy a ticket to an AEW pay-per-view, and I know what I'm going to get there. I'm going to get 4 to 5 hours of very good, very varied wrestling. Or SummerSlam was not varied. Every single match had a shoulder block spot. Every single one ran their shoulders into the post. You know what I mean? And then held their shoulder for an amount of time. You got the same sort of story up and down the card, up and down the card. Whereas AEW, like you said, you're going to get a Texas death match, a technical wrestling match, a high flying match, maybe a luchador match, maybe you're going to get a lot of different and people still buy into the AEW pay-per-views being a great bet. People buy them on pay-per-view still. People buy tickets to them and go to those still. So I think nothing has changed in terms of the AEW pay-per-view. And I think the AEW pay-per-views are still the safest bet in professional wrestling. I think they're phenomenal. Are they going to reach the highs that they reached in 2021? Maybe not, because that was just everything in lockstep. Everything was so perfect. The in-ring was matching with the stories and matching with the TV and everything was, but I still think the AEW pay-per-views are phenomenal because they do give you that great in-ring and their audience is clearly, and their fan base has clearly said, yes, we still trust that these are going to be worth our ticket and worth watching. So no, I have no issues with the pay-per-view, but I do think that you are getting on the week to week AEW television, you are getting these kind of strange fluctuations where it doesn't feel like one vision being seen through. And some people might see that as a positive, some people might see that as a negative. I'm just kind of saying, what I think out of that. Whereas a Paul Levesque WWE, you see a singular vision being seen through, and they might have a bunch of writers or whatever, but everybody feels like they're in lockstep. Whereas AEW, it does feel like segment to segment, it does kind of not feel like everything is just one cohesive, company vision being played out, and it might be this particular writer or this particular wrestler or this particular character. And again, like I said, that might be good and that might be bad to certain people. I just kind of call it like I see it. I just see a company that on a week to week TV basis, it does feel like you're getting a lot of different things all at once, and maybe doesn't feel like all pulling in the same direction, if that makes sense.
Do you think no having like at least an internal foundational logic to a company, I think is really important in terms of like what you can and can't do. And I definitely think that in some ways that like especially with like the EVP storyline and the executive power and those kind of things they've definitely gotten away from the foundational aspect of it. But I think I don't know if it's problematic for AEW to have like dramatic differences from segment to segment. It probably is, but I think that it's a fine line when you're talking about like really encouraging like a lot of diversity and different types of match structure and different types of approaches to pro wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to kind of satisfy different people and kind of having an evolving taste. I mean, I'm not like me and my taste. I'm not limited to one style of wrestling that I like. I like a lot of different versions of wrestling, and I
Yeah.
like seeing. It's really nice to see a really well funded American pro wrestling company put together all of this stuff and take a lot of stuff that was kind of out there on the indies or in other countries and bring it to American television. Um, but at the same time, I do think it. I don't know. I'm kind of like in two different ways. I definitely agree that like the EVP storyline is a bomb, which is really is the EVP storyline is supposed to be like a major angle that like kind of carried the company throughout the summer. I feel like
Yeah.
in terms of like this was a really big angle that they set up, um, and
Started out great too.
it's
I
a
loved it when
bomb.
it first
Like
started.
yeah, it was a great idea, and I was like, this is what the company. And when it happened, I was like, this is what the company needs, like a really major angle that people are gonna get into,
Lean into
and
the people, the uneasiness around the Bucks or whatever. They can
yeah.
lean into that,
And part of it was Kenny not, if Kenny was around and it was like a major Kenny match, then maybe that's a little bit, it works out a little bit differently. But like you go back and like watch like the Blood and Guts match, like I liked Blood and Guts because it's like just like pure chaos, which I enjoy. Um, but I think Blood and Guts was carried largely by the Hangman and Swerve feud, which kind of has nothing to do with the EVP storyline, really. And the Darby and Jungle Boy, which has a little bit more to do with it, but that doesn't really directly involve the Bucks. Those are like the real
yeah.
personal conflicts
And then Mark
that,
Briscoe being great, which has
yeah.
nothing to do with it with the story whatsoever. Yeah.
Um, right. And it's just, but it's like to me, it's like this is not an angle with momentum. I don't think the acclaimed program is hot. I don't think the FDR program is hot. And by doing this, it would by doing this angle, you kind of sacrificed some of the integrity of faith that fans put in terms of the internal logic that the company was using in storylines by just making an evil authority figure that can kind of snap their fingers and do a bunch of shit, um, which is a really dangerous thing to do. And if it was like a super hot angle, you could get away with it because you can get away with anything when something's super hot.
Yeah.
But the fact that it hasn't hit that at all is like, okay, why did we just kind of sacrifice this trust that fans had in terms of the internal logic? And what I mean by that is, I mean like the EVPs being able to get people, threaten to fire people, give people title shots, be able to get people kicked out of the building, like all
Mm-hmm.
this kind of like executive power that AEW has never exercised at all before.
Right. And also
Um,
has logic gaps beyond belief. I mean,
yeah,
even if you
100%.
want to tell the story, it's just like on a week-to-week basis, it's like, okay, well, Tony made this match, and then the
Yeah,
Bucks made this match. Wait, Danielson made this
yeah.
match, and this match was just made, and nobody knows
And
how it
you
got made.
could
It just
get
got made.
away
And you're
with
like, what?
that. You could get away with that if it was really hot, just like the way
Yeah,
WWE got away with erasing that Cody and Rock segments
exactly.
because what they ended up doing was really hot. But when it's not hot, it's like, okay, what did we sacrifice to get very diminishing, not a strong return at all? Um, and then on the other hand, and kind of in relation to that, well, maybe I'll say that for later. But I was gonna draw the comparison to like in fantasy, like in fantasy writing, there is always the conundrum of introducing magic to a story. This happened on Game of Thrones, probably most obviously, but once you like have magic, which is always inherently this kind of like unexplained thing that can do something that exists outside the physical world of possibility. Like once you introduce that, your entire story can completely fall apart. Like once someone can like, "Oh, I just went back in time and did this," or, "Oh, I got this. I was able to like take over this person's mind to make them do this." Like once you start introducing that kind of stuff to a story, it can kind of undermine the entire infrastructure of the universe that you've created.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like the like EVP angle has done, which is like, well, now the Young Bucks like, why can't they? They can ban someone from ringside, and then Tony Khan also kind of has power, and then Christopher
Hmm,
Daniels
hmm.
kind of has power on addition to Tony Khan. It's like what? Like it's too much. It destroys the logic of the company,
Yeah.
and that
And
hurts. That hurts, and that hurts. Long
it
term, that
definitely,
will do damage.
it definitely does. Cause yeah, going back and watching these old AEW shows for that series on Flagship Patreon, like I was saying, is the internal logic and the kind of, like I said, the central focus of the company, because I think that is still important to have like that one vision or whatever. you can hear it up and down the shows. It's, wins and losses and moving up in the rankings. And that's what everything was about for the early part. And yeah, of course you had deviations from that and guys would have feuds and stuff, and you could do that. But your normal, like, hey, here's two guys that are in the ring. The story of those matches were, all right, this guy is, 2-3 and he's looking to get to 3-3 and move up the rankings. And that was it. And that was the story you needed, was that guy wants to win this match so you can move up the rankings. And yeah, of course you would have guys interfere and other stories, and you can deviate from that. But the clear, the way that every story was kind of told, and the through line of every single story was, people want to win titles and people want to win matches because the way to be at the top of the company and make the most money and get all the fame is to win the titles and be at the top of the rankings or whatever. So that was sort of the way that matches got made for a while. And I think that at the end of the day, no matter what way you want to tell it, and I'm not saying that needs to be the right way and that's the way you have to tell your story, but you have to have a clear vision and a clear line of, okay, everybody in this company is going in this direction because of this reason. And I think that's what you said. Like, one of the big issues with his EVP story is it kind of breaks that logic where on a given basis, you're going to watch an episode of Dynamite and 6 matches are going to get made, and 2 of them are going to be made by Christopher Daniels, and maybe one of them is made by the Young Bucks, and maybe none of them are made by Tony Khan. But then on Collision, Tony Khan is making a match, and it's like, what is going like if you try to take this in real terms, it's like, what the fuck is happening? Like, what is the power structure? What's the org chart of this company? Like, I don't understand how anything is being made, and that when you never want to have that be
it's like
the case.
It's like a Game of Thrones. Like, once the lady in red can make a smoke demon show up and assassinate somebody at any time, like, what are we even fighting about anymore once that power is shown to exist?
Yeah,
and it's the same way with like the Young Bucks and kind of like their ability to make control. I mean, it seems like it would probably what they need to do, and this is probably the plan, is like Kenny is going to come back and he'll like wrestle Okada, and it will be like, if the Bucks lose, they will lose their EVP powers. And then hopefully they do that, and then Okada loses, and that's the end of anyone having any authority figure that's like not Tony Khan. I'm okay with Christopher Daniels being like an on-screen matchmaker and stuff like that. I liked that AEW didn't have the authority figures. I liked that it was just like Tony Khan. It was kind of ridiculous at some points where like an angle would happen, like 10 seconds later, Tony Schiavone would be like, "I'm hearing this from Tony Khan." That
that was weird. And then there's graphics ready.
Graphics already ready. Like, I'm okay. Like, I was okay with. I mean, I wouldn't have Tony as an on-screen figure at all. Like, but I was okay with just like your generic, essentially babyface matchmaker that everyone at least respects that they have power.
Yeah, I don't love it, but if it's going to be your Jack Tunney style guy, who's going to be Christopher Daniels, that's fine.
You kind of I don't know. I feel like American television wrestling, you need to have somebody that's like making the matches occasionally, especially if they're like, heels want to duck matches and things like that. I don't know. I'll kind of wrap up on this as a broader point. Maybe this is just specific more to me and maybe people that are in our level of niche, but AEW is not fun to talk about. I find it to be completely exhausting. And just coming from all angles of the discussions around AEW, I just don't think that it is a fun or exciting thing to have conversations with people about for the most part. It has to be like a one-on-one in-person conversation, kind of like what we're having now. But like any discussion online about AEW is just is like death to me. It's so bad.
Oh, it is terrible. And one of the things that's been the new sort of discussion point that's going on is people are going to be leaving AEW. Hot take. Somebody will leave AEW in the next couple of months. Who that person is, we'll find out later. Is it Ricky Starks? Is it Daniel Garcia? Is it Penta? Whatever. People are going to leave. But what happens is, and this is not just in our, in our circles and the Voice of Wrestling Discord or whatever, I see it all over the place, is that every time somebody leaves AEW now, it is a referendum and a crack the knuckles, let's have a big picture take about AEW and the booking of Tony Khan. And it's like, guys, we need to mature out of this. We have to understand what a healthy wrestling ecosystem looks like. And I get it. There's a lot of wrestling fans that never lived through a healthy wrestling ecosystem. If you are under the age of, if you're under the age of 30, you basically don't know. I barely know it. I mean, I'm 37 and I barely know a healthy wrestling ecosystem. I just had a couple of years of a healthy wrestling ecosystem as me being like a real fan. We don't know what that's like. And so people don't understand that People will go. If somebody feels stale and they don't feel like they have the best opportunities in one company, they'll go to another company. That's good. I love that. That should be welcomed. We should cheer that on. We should say, you know what? Penta and Phoenix, we'll just use them as an example because they seem the most likely, one to move on. If Penta and Phoenix can look at each other and say, you know what? I think we have a better opportunity at the other company. Go for it. And you know what? For AEW standpoint, they could say, you know what? Okay. We now have an opening. We now have a new opening in our tag teams. Who are we going to, I would see that as a good thing if I'm AEW. Say, okay, you know what? Who can we have step up now? Who can fill that void? Who can become our new, let's think of it now. That to me, that's an exciting opportunity to tell new stories with new people and and for WWE, an exciting thing. Hey, we have Penta and Phoenix coming in. That's cool. For those guys, hey, we're working in front of new fans. We're working in a new company. That's good. But wrestling fans don't see it that way these days. Wrestling fans see it as
everything has to be a
God.
big point. Yeah, it's a
right. The
decisive
momentum
moment.
has swung in WWE's favor. And what is Tony Khan doing? And why can't he book this? And maybe he can't book luchadors, or maybe he can't book Mexican. And it's like, oh my God, we can't do this every single time. I mean, we can't. Cody was one that if you want to do the big thing about, yes, because that guy was a fucking executive vice president of that company, was a vital building block in that company existing. If you wanted to do that freak out during Cody, that's fine. I wouldn't tell anybody to ever not do that for the Cody thing, because that was a gigantic, eye-opening, what is going on type of thing. But we can't do that for fucking Brian Pillman Jr. and Jade Cargill and Penta and Phoenix. And I mean, we can't keep, and Sean Spears, for God's sakes, for Sean Spears, Ethan Page. We did it for Ethan Page, Jesse.
They fumbled Brian Pillman Jr. How did they fumble Brian Pillman Jr.?
Right. Stop. We can't do this for every single one. We have to understand what a healthy wrestling ecosystem looks like. And like you said, it's exhausting. It's exhausting because in any other era of wrestling, you would see people moving on and say, yeah, they're moving on to better opportunities. Good for them. All right, who's next up in AEW? Who can we fill that void with? But that's not how the conversation is. The conversation is we're still in this scared. People say it's maybe once the TV deal comes. I don't buy it. I really don't, because I think that's just the way that wrestling fans have kind of grown up.
Well, I think at least the last few months we've been in like the stretch of like most people being like, yeah, the TV deal is going to come. It's probably going to be pretty big.
Yeah.
So we're already kind of getting some insight into.
Yeah, for sure. But it does still feel like the fan base is so nervous that this thing's going to go away.
Yeah.
That it's going to die.
It's getting worse, despite it should be getting better, because we're now years and years into the existence.
It's 5 years. It's not this little I mean, yes, if you want to have these weird, like, nervous conversations in
2019.
Like December of
the
2019,
bad Dynamite,
or
the missed punches.
Yeah,
I gotta go back and watch. I gotta go back and watch that show. I think that'll be a fascinating rewatch.
It would be really interesting.
You should add that to your pay-per-view. Maybe at
the changing of the guard Dynamite.
Yeah, once you wrap it up, because I'd be fascinated. Like, how bad is that show actually compared to?
Yeah, it's probably not even that bad. It's probably just okay. But
it's like one bad segment at the end.
Yeah, but once they kind of got that deal in early 2020, that was like hey, this is a pretty cool thing, and we believe in you guys for a little bit. I'd be like,
once they survived the global pandemic that threatened to destroy the entire wrestling industry,
right? Yeah, okay. They survived that as a very early company, and to me, from that point forward, I never had this, oh my God, it's gonna go away thing. Oh my God, it's gonna go away. But people still have this, and it's every single time that a wrestler leaves or some bit of news comes out, it's like, let's have this giant globalized big picture referendum conversation about AEW, and it's fucking exhausting. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe we're doing this every single time. And you know what? What's going to happen is a bunch of people are going to leave AEW and a bunch of people are going to leave WWE. And this is going to continue to happen time and time again. My God, go look at the territories. My God, go look at the Monday Night Wars. People bounce back and forth all the time, and that's good. That's a good, healthy ecosystem where someone can feel stale in one company and call the other company, and they might say, hey, we got this idea for you, this idea for you, and here's a contract. And they go, okay, cool, let me try that. And it might work, it might not, whatever. But like, that's good. I want that. I don't want the situation that WWE was in where Dolph Ziggler was there for 17 years or whatever. I don't want a situation where The Miz comes out and we say, oh, this is The Miz's 19th appearance on a SummerSlam. Like, that sounds awful. I hate that. You know, the one thing I always used to hate? Johnny Gargano would come out and they'd be like, he's main eventing his 15th takeover. And I'm like, that's not good. You shouldn't be main eventing 15 NXT takeovers or whatever. Like, that's bad. That doesn't, I don't like that. I don't want that. I want people moving and different things and different stories to be told. But there's a whole generation of wrestling fans that don't see it that way. And you know what? WWE has done that, in their perception too, because you go watch the Monday Night Wars documentary and it was like Chris Jericho and the Giant left WCW, the sinking ship of WCW, and joined WWF. And then the Radicals jumped off of WCW and joined WWF. So now we see every single jump as people getting off the sinking ship and joining and it doesn't have to be that. God damn it. We don't have to always be the Monday Night Wars. It's not always the Monday Night Wars.
I always love that history because people rarely talk about by far the most significant jump from WCW to WWF, which is when WCW fired Steve Austin.
Yeah.
But it's always like, when the Giant went over, I'm like, and immediately bombed in WWE.
Right. By WrestleMania was just a guest referee and then wasn't actually even the guest referee because they didn't trust him enough to even guest referee in the main event. So they had a schmaz, guest referee thing with the Mankind, and then they just had a normal referee. That by March of 1999, he was irrelevant already. And Chris Jericho, another one that by a month in, Vince McMahon was basically berating the guy and saying, "You suck. You're not worth a contract. And every single match you have to, talk to Sean Waltman about before." Yeah, because Sean Waltman knows my style and you don't know shit. And you're those are the guys that are seen as, and hell, the Radicals. The Radicals had like one, decent, and then they were basically mid-carders by, a month later.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of Perry Saturn. I don't think Perry Saturn moved a lot of things. Well, when I talk about I just think the AEW discourse, I'm going to describe now almost every single person that talks about AEW and how much, and I don't like any of these people. I don't like interacting with any of these people. I don't like, and this seems to be almost the entire AEW discourse is these people, which makes me feel like I'm on island. I don't like the insecure WWE fans, obviously, that are just constantly bashing AEW and they're afraid that other people like something that's not WWE. I don't like the grifters on the podcasts and other forms of old carnies and things like that, people trying to, or trolls or anything like that. I don't like those people talking about AEW. I don't like the PTSD Monday Night War doomers that are constantly worried about the company going out of business and how this is just the beginning of the end. I don't like the people that are obsessed with just individual wrestlers in AEW, and if that person isn't getting a push or that person's not getting pushed immediately or that way they want, they immediately go into doom mode and how the company's awful now. I don't like dealing with the people that get mad about really small details. I don't like dealing with the people that every single thing that's somewhat similar to something that WWE might consider doing is considered this huge philosophical fault and the reason the company is going to lose all its fans. I don't like dealing with the people that are jealous fans of other companies that were, maybe it's New Japan or TNA or whatever, people that are mad that AEW has taken the place as the alternative to WWE, so they're constantly mad about AEW kind of taking up the oxygen and those kind of conversations. I don't like dealing with any of those people, and it seems like those are all the people I talk about with AEW with, and to me it's just become really exhausting and unfun. I'm watching, I watched Dynamite this week. Thought it was a solid 2-hour show. It was wasn't the greatest Dynamite ever. It wasn't the worst Dynamite ever. It's I was entertained for 2 hours, which is pretty much all I can ask. And I'm looking on our Discord, and I'm just seeing people were oh, I didn't like that. Oh, I like this thing. And I was do you guys know what the standard of television pro wrestling is in this country pre-Dynamite?
They don't. The problem is they don't. Yeah,
they don't remember. It's kind of become, and it's a lot of this is a penalty of a company that has been really good at certain times and had peaked when it peaks super, super high, that when something is just kind of standard, it's seen as almost a disappointment. But I'm man, I'm watching this SummerSlam and this just absolutely just offensive WWE product and these NXT shows. And I'm watching this G1 that's just full of just the same generic interference finishes that we've seen for 20 straight years, seems like. And it's man, I know I watched a show and MJF was a little hokey in his post-match promo and he made a face and that was bad. And this guy did a job. I don't know why they beat this guy. And I'm man, this is I don't know. I just am a very optimistic, positive fan about AEW, and even in its current state, even if I totally admit that there's plenty of mistakes to be made. And I feel every other discussion about AEW is just some extreme discussion, either about how terrible it is, how amazing it is, how immensely consequential every single thing that ever happens on the show seems to be to some sort of broader narrative. And it's I don't know, I just pretty passively enjoying the show. I know I think the Hangman losing to Bryan Danielson, and kind of the direction that story was, where it felt you had to have a massive take either way
on
it. Which is oh, this was a great idea because I think they can do this, this, and this, and it's going to work out well. And the people that are mad about it, I know this was Joe's take. It's like, the people that are mad about it, they just don't, they're going to understand that this was the right move in the long run and all that stuff. And then on the flip side, you had other people that were like, oh, they're screwing up Hangman again. And I was like, for me, I was like, I mean, if I was booking, I probably would have done Hangman Swerve at Wembley, but I'm not totally. I want to see how this plays out, essentially, and I think it's worked out pretty well so far in terms of. I think the Danielson Swerve match is a good match. It's going to be really interesting. I think they've definitely put a lot of thought into how they're going to make that match feel as important as possible.
Mhm.
But I just feel like there's no nuance anymore with the AEW discussion. There's no patience, I think, with a lot of the stuff, and it's made the promotion less enjoyable to an extent because it's just so exhausting to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, honestly, I think that's true of a lot of things. To be
Oh, it's
like,
definitely true about yeah, you're right. It's
I
a
think
part of it is in
everything is
nature.
exhausting, and
Yeah.
we should all just log the fuck off because it's all fucking exhausting. I mean, goddamn, like TV shows, sports. It's just
Oh,
all. It's just
I'm sorry. I
everyone's got
forgot.
to have.
I missed a group that I just remembered. I'm
Oh
really
yeah, what do you
sick
got?
of the. Oh, I kind of maybe know something. Here are some details. Look at me. I'm a scoopster. People that the AEW,
Right,
that
right.
apparently AEW has in prominence with these people that are want to pretend to be insiders or whatever. But
Yeah.
I also hate those people too.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that. But no, it is. Yeah, it's exhausting to do any. But in a ecosystem where every discussion of everything is exhausting, AEW in particular is like the most exhausting. And Joe predicted it at the time too. And I didn't necessarily disagree with him at the time, but this is before when AEW first got announced, and we could even tell then that it was like, oh boy, we're getting a lot of takes already about a company that hasn't existed. I mean, they had their fucking introduction press conference and people were like, actually, they should have done this. And Joe said, like, this is going to be the most scrutinized wrestling company ever because we're seeing it develop in this social media age. It's coming to life as we're all, engaged in discourse with each other. Like we've never been engaged with discourse with each other ever in this globalized, social media thing or whatever. And this company is created in the midst of this, and it is going to be the most scrutinized thing ever. And goddamn, if it's not 10 times that,
Yeah.
it's absurd.
I expected it to be scrutinized by the grifters and the insecure WWE fans because they were already doing that with New Japan and 5 stars in the Tokyo Dome and that kind of
yeah,
bullshit.
and Will
Uh,
Ospreay gifts
yeah.
and stuff like that.
What's surprised me is how annoying people that like AEW's product are
Yeah,
about
the fans
discussing
themselves also do that. Yeah,
the panic
and
and the
I've
angst
tried
and
to
the
always
concern.
bring it up, like you said, that AEW is producing the best American wrestling television ever by far. Not even close. They already had done that by mid 2020 and are just continuing to do that because go back and watch some old wrestling television if you don't believe me, man. I mean, I go back and watch 2010 Raw. Go back and watch 1995 Raw. Go back and watch, yeah, you had a little run, but even like your peak Nitros are just like there's a lot of bad stuff on those shows too, but people remember Sting coming from the rafters and stuff.
I feel like a lot of the people that are critical of AEW that are actually watching AEW's product that are critical of AEW's product now probably would not like WCW Nitro's
Oh
product at
no, no,
all
no. And
either.
that they probably don't know much else because
No.
that's something constant in arguments with
Well,
modern wrestling fans. A lot of them don't have any knowledge of the history of wrestling. They've
yeah.
kind of come to age in the social media age, and they've come to age with the creation of AEW or the last couple of years, and they have no knowledge or no scope of what the history of pro wrestling is. So I think from that standpoint, they might look at a Dynamite and say, "Oh God," and it's like, "Oh man, you don't realize how good you have it." I mean, this is pretty good compared to what most American TV wrestling was. I mean, God, go watch some fucking 2007, TNA Impact if you want to really realize how special AEW Dynamite is on major American television because it could be much worse. Trust me, it could be much worse.
You're right. It could be a lot more boring. It's a. I'll also point out that something I've learned from experience is watching, um, like an episode, whether it's a pay per view or a Dynamite or a Collision or whatever. Watching that while also being in a Discord channel or the Slack channel or scrolling through Twitter or seeing other people's takes on it is an awful way to watch a show
Yeah,
because you're constantly bombarded by various opinions that I found myself much more enjoyable just watching the show and not constantly thinking about, "Ooh, I wonder what people are going to think about this. So I like
Yeah,
this, but are other people not going to like this? And does that mean
right.
it's going to be a problem for the show?" And it's like it's much
Well,
more
and then you have
easier.
this conscience of like, or this crisis of like, well, why did I enjoy this and nobody else did? What's wrong with me? Or like
Yeah,
whatever. It's just like,
or
just
like I like this, but I know I kind of can't like it that much because I if other people don't like it, then it's going to be like it's a negative, even though it's something that entertained me. That's how I find myself catching myself thinking sometime, where I'm like,
yeah.
"Oh, I hope they don't do this thing," not because I personally would hate it, but I'm like, "Oh, the discourse around this is going to be awful." Like that's what I found
Man,
myself doing
what a
with
way to
a.
consume media. What
But
are
I'm
we
serious.
doing?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
what are we
serious. I'm like,
doing?
I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, this thing would be cool. Like, I'd be entertained by this. But I'm like, oh, a lot of the people like that I interact with won't like this, and it'll be kind of annoying if they do it. So I hope they just don't do it. And it's like that's not healthy at all. Which is why I've kind of taken a step back from, especially live interacting with
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
like that because
Yeah, I think
it's
people think that they have to live interact with stuff because that's,
well, it's the
people.
natural way of doing
Yeah.
things. Like when you watch, if you're watching something, especially if it's live, like you have your phone out. You're like during ads, you're gonna
Hmm.
pull it out and look at things. I mean, one thing I know we gotta wrap it up, but I just wanted to touch on something that I wanted to bring it up because you mentioned it earlier about like WWE's really captured certain elements of social media and like how much, and you guys mentioned this on the flagship this week about like how much WWE's product is geared, seem to be geared towards people filming themselves at events, like
Yeah.
having reactions to the stuff. And like that's what counts for social media. I can't believe that stuff is popular on social media. I kind of doubt that it is. I think it's a lot of people just trying to like get their own clout for social media. Um, but it's really like pervasive. Like I was at a and it's gonna sound like a grumpy old man thing. Um, I
Well,
was at
you probably are at this point.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
You know
it's
what?
getting
Whatever. I am too. It's fine.
yes, I played a game of pickup basketball where like there was one other guy who was in his 30s and like everyone else was like under 21. Like, what's going on here? Um,
I get called sir when I play basketball now,
a lot
which
of
is
misstep,
horrifying.
a lot of missed step backs in that game I was playing
Oh
the
yeah,
other day.
oh yeah, oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. One time I did something, and a guy said, "Oh, you're pretty good for your age, sir." And I went, "Oh my god, sir! First off,
huge, yeah.
I'm 37.
Back in
It's not
my
that old,
day,
dude." But then I realized,
here's a real problem. Back in my day, people that played pickup basketball that weren't any good just try to get rebounds and set screens. Today, now everyone, no matter how bad you are, takes step
yes,
back threes.
yeah,
It's awful.
everyone is Trey Young, not stuff. And I try to, I do this thing too to make also to make me age myself. Is after the game, I will pull the kid aside and say, "You know what you need to do? You need to watch Steph Curry
Oh, that's
and not the
awful.
shots,
That's
and
an
not the
awful thing to
shots.
do, Rich. That's an
Watch
awful.
No, but not the shots. Because I always say you are doing you think you're Steph Curry because he hits step back threes. The reason he's able to hit those threes and the way he's able to be open is because he knows how to pass, he knows how to drive, he knows how to move without the ball. Watch that stuff because
Oh,
you're watching the shots, man. That's all you
oh,
are watching.
you're like fucking telling the kids to slow down, brother, in the locker room. This is
Absolutely,
awful.
absolutely. I'm telling them that. Yeah, and I don't know. None of them take my advice. But that's fine. That's okay. But
You gotta sell. Look at Ricky Morton. Um, there's
they're
a
right. They should watch. They should watch Ricky Morton. Everybody should watch Ricky Morton.
yeah, you and Rich. I think you and Joe had the conversation about like I think they mentioned Ricky Morton on SummerSlam, and it's like how many people actually know who Ricky Morton is?
Nobody
Like
knew.
it's like and
Yeah.
it's like the one of the like the most fundamental, like the person that was like regarded as being like the greatest at this extremely fundamental skill that every wrestler
Yeah,
can have.
and for 30 years was the what people would just say playing Ricky Morton, and everybody knew. Everybody in every wrestling locker room, every indie wrestling locker room, every major American wrestling locker room, every message board, everywhere knew what playing Ricky Morton meant. If you went to a modern indie locker room and told a guy, "Hey, I want you to play Ricky Morton in this match," do you think they'd had no fucking idea? If you went to a
What if
NXT,
Ricky
NXT locker
only
room,
if Ricky Morton had made an appearance in that indie recently?
yeah, exactly, exactly. So maybe GCW because Ricky Morton is standing right there, and he'd go, "Yeah, yeah, hold on, I'll tell you
They
all
say
about it."
no. He's right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Like him, this guy, watch him. But if you went to the NXT locker room right now and told, any of those guys, any of these NIL people, I need you to play, no, 0% would know what the fuck that means.
Well, to get back to your point, like that's because that company doesn't value that.
Right.
Like, right? Selling for a big time for a hot tag, like you don't need to do that. The fans watching like wouldn't be that invested in it. Um, but the point I was making was that like I do think that like you made a really good point, I think, about like social media being different. You know, as a professional social media person that you are, um, that like you're right about like AW being maybe stuck on Twitter and like WWE being very good at like TikTok and getting people to record themselves and the Samantha Irvin TikToks and things like that. Because that is what people are doing. They're not tweeting anymore. They're taking videos and sharing them of their reactions and stuff like that. I was at a particularly dire Patriots preseason game on Thursday. It was Patriots Panthers. The Panthers didn't even play their starters. It was raining. It was just an ugly, ugly preseason game, and they had the jumbotron. You know, and of course the jumbotron shows people in the stands in between, plays or in between like possession changes and the end of quarters and stuff like that. And when they they show people in the jumbotron, the people see themselves on jumbotron and they start waving around. It's like a classic sports interaction. I'm sure everyone that's ever been to a sporting event has seen this. But you know what every single person does now when they
They
find out they're
grab
on
their
the
phone.
jumbotron?
They
They
film
try to,
themselves on the
yeah,
jumbotron.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they really can't take their phones out fast enough to like film themselves on the jumbotron because it's only for like a few seconds. But it's like it was really startling, like because I saw probably hundreds of people on this terrible preseason game that had a lot of punting, so there's a lot of change of possession. So I saw hundreds of people on this jumbotron, and like every single time they cut to someone, you'd see someone like notice on the jumbotron, like make a face, start waving, then see them be like, "Oh shit," and like start going through their pocket to try to pull their phone out. And by the time like they got their phone out, it cut to someone else who then repeated the exact same acts. It's like that's our society now.
Yeah.
And WWE is doing a better job of catering towards that society.
Absolutely. 100. They're doing a great job of catering to that fan for sure.
Do you think they should like in the future, like instead of just like hitting Roman's music, they should do like a little like 10-second preamble so
Yeah.
people can get their phones out and then when Roman's music hits, they can
Something's
all
about to
yeah.
happen, people. Grab your phones. Well, I think the good thing is that for them, that these people have their phones out literally the entire time,
That's
and
true.
you know,
Yeah.
so they make it. But like you said, they might not be able to get to them as quickly as possible. So you're right. They maybe need to have a little bit of a bell or a whistle or like a siren to say 1 second, Roman is coming, get ready. And then it wouldn't stop the pop, honestly. If they had a big thing that said, "Wah, wah, wah, get your phones out,"
No, because part of it
and
is
then the music would
performative.
play, the same pop would happen. The
Yeah,
exact same pop
because
would
it's
happen.
performative, right? The people
Yeah.
want to see want to show everyone how much fun they're having.
Mhm.
So not and like obviously he got a real organic pop. Like
Oh, of
I'm
course.
not
Of
making
course.
that up, but like part of it is like you want to be part of the show, so you want to pop and like
Yeah.
Roman has aura.
I'm
How,
just
how much of
man,
a
what a situation we're in where you and I both agree, and I'm sure everybody listening to this would probably agree that if they put a big siren on and said Roman is coming in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then pause for a second and hit his music, the reaction would be exactly the
yeah
same.
Samantha Irvin on the fainting couch.
Yeah.
The yeah, that's brutal. I mean,
I don't like that at all. I hate that how true that
hey,
is.
that's where wrestling is going.
It's
It's
where
going to be
society
about
is going, man.
how
God
much of
damn.
a mark is Cody for showing up every week and like working all the house shows and like just doing all like the charity, public
Yeah.
appearances and charity work. And this guy, Roman, makes more money than him, never does anything, doesn't show up anymore for any of the shows, like doesn't make any public media appearances at all, like just comes out, just totally like uh
Doesn't have to
gets like the
work his
giant
ass off.
reaction.
Puts his
Yeah,
finger in
Cody,
the air and then
the
spears a guy and
SummerSlam
is
match, Cody's like has no one gives a shit about Cody at all. He's just
yeah,
busting his
yeah.
ass. It's like, what a mark. They must think
Yeah, and
he
he's working
is.
all the house shows, and Roman's new contract says, "Hey, I work when I want to work, which is none of these fucking shows, and I'll see you guys in 4 months." And, and also, you're
Yeah,
going to pay me a lot of money. And they said, "Yes, sir. Sounds great."
I do. I do think I know you and Joe talked about it on the flagship about like how this is now it's Roman Rock, it's the path, and you know this is Roman's company and things like that. I'll be interested to see this how it unfolds because this maybe because it changed. It's different because now Cody won the title, so that story is over. So fans don't care as much about that. But like clearly coming into WrestleMania and coming out of WrestleMania, the money match was Cody versus Rock.
Yeah.
And Roman totally felt like an accessory to like Roman's WrestleMania performance is like he was a total accessory to the Rock leading
Absolutely.
up to
Mhm.
it. Um, and people saw him and he was really exposed like that. And he kind of just went away, and maybe that momentum is back again. But I'll be really interested in seeing how this plays out heading into WrestleMania again this year, because it, like, I think Roman has more of the momentum because he's not around. But if I would not discount Cody's ability to kind of adapt and get himself back into that picture.
Yeah, because Roman's never, I mean, for all the credit we're giving him right now as being, the top babyface in the company, he's never been able to play that role effectively whatsoever. And that's
Well,
what got
he's
us in this
been the
position.
top babyface in the company for like the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, when Cody came back, yes, but like when he was heel Roman Reigns, he was the top babyface in the company.
But I wonder if they're going to be able to sort of, because is he going to go out there and cut promos? Because that was one of the big
He doesn't
things
have to.
too.
He has aura, Rich.
Yeah, right. And that I don't know. Are they just going to go based on? I'm fascinated by this. I'm
Yeah,
fascinated that if he
it
just
is.
has aura and never is around, is that the best method, the best path forward for Roman to be the top guy? Is that okay? We now know what the winning formula is, and that is he's never here, but then he comes here occasionally, and that's how we get him over. Because when they tried to make him, the clean cut babyface that would go out and start off an episode of Raw cutting a promo, that shit never worked. It was awful, and yeah, he always got swallowed up by the guys who really got it in terms of how to be a great pro wrestler. Your
Yeah.
Codys, your Rocks, those sort of guys. Will that happen again, or will they now realize, okay, after WrestleMania, we understand that this guy, there's a certain way to get him over, and oddly, it's he doesn't talk and he never comes around.
Yeah.
That
Is the
sort of stuff
momentum
is,
is the momentum there for him for his deficiencies like on the mic or being
yeah, I don't
particularly
know.
outwardly charismatic? Um
I'm
are
fascinated by
those
that. I really
is the
am,
momentum enough to cover up for those deficiencies? Um
because they won. He's now
are
the de
are
facto top
people
babyface. Yeah.
I think people, it was a big moment, right? He comes back after not being around. He finally spears Solo. Are people really going to care that much about Solo and Roman? People care about Rock Roman. I'm sure of that. But
I
like
think
once we're actually into this feud, because I think an underrated aspect of the Uso feud was that Jimmy and Jay did like a lot of actual good work. Like they did all of the talking and like getting people invested in what they were doing. And Roman was just kind of like standing there as the final boss. Like I don't think Solo's nowhere close to that level and getting the emotion across. Um, and I don't think the Tonkins are that much better. So
no.
is there really like is there really that much momentum for like Roman and Solo like to have like an exciting match whenever they're gonna do that
Not
match?
the match, but I think the idea of the original tribal chief taking back his place as the
That
tribal
happened
chief,
at
like,
we saw that happen at SummerSlam. Like, are people invested in like a long-term story that's like that where no one thinks Solo is even close to Roman's level?
no.
So I'm kind of curious about that as well. But I probably will not be watching any SmackDowns to find out.
Right, I'm kinda
Um,
done trying to figure it out because it's clearly, like, it's not,
yeah, we can't.
I find it
Yeah, we can't.
ridiculous.
We can't use our logical brains to
Right, but then
figure
I'll
out
go to
just.
work and someone's like, "Do you
Yeah.
think Solo's gonna be the tribal chief?" I'm like, "What? No. What? No, of course not. What are you talking about?"
Well, I said this on my last show, but like the fact that Solo, like, there was no like a bunch of people talking about how good Solo was is like a really bad sign about how bad Solo really is.
Yeah, even their own fan base can't lie
Yeah.
about that. Like, I have a buddy who's, like, dyed in the wool, like, every single thing, and he's like, yeah, I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and his idea was Solo. His Solo's not it. It's got to be Jacob. Jacob's got to be the new tribal chief. It can't be Solo. And so he was still with that mindset of I'm worried about who the tribal chief is. But even he was like, yeah, Solo ain't it, and Tagaloa ain't it. It's got to be Jacob Fatu has got to be the one that becomes the new tribal chief or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's so he's still is still all bought into the who's going to be the head of the table tribal chief story, but even he recognizes that Solo ain't it, and that's I think all the fans really do.
You know what match I'm more interested in than like any WWE match in a long time that's presumably going to happen soon? It's Randy Orton versus Walter at the Bash of Berlin show.
Mhm.
Because it's really hard to have like a mediocre match with Walter in that setting. Like the fans are going to be so into it.
Will it matter though if it's mediocre?
Well, that's my point. Is that I
Yeah,
want to know like obviously the fans are going to be into it no matter what. People, like people that like WWE are going to say it's good no matter what. But I'm interested from like my personal critical perspective. I'm totally going to
Mhm.
write something about it. I've already like envisioned it. because like I'm kind of fast. Randy Orton kind of fascinates me in this end of like somebody who is over that is fundamentally extremely good, and people that work with him will say he's great, but never has interesting or exciting matches because he's so
Right.
boring and he doesn't work. He works one speed, and he's never had to push himself to do anything interesting ever. And like this is like a huge like litmus test. It's like it takes a very special type of performer to like blow it with falter in that kind of setting and not have like a 4-star match at a minimum. And so like I'm really fascinated to see like is he like I would I'm and that's why like I'm always fascinated with Randy Orton. Like I would love to see Randy Orton in like a G1 just because I want to know what would happen.
Yeah,
Um
would he adapt, or would he just lock on that side headlock and say, "This is how
because
I work, and this is how
even
you're
though
supposed to work"?
I
Yeah,
think he's super boring, like he does possess the ability to adapt and be great, but he's never motivated to do so.
right. He
And
has no
so,
obligation to do it or desire to do it.
yeah, like, is he just gonna be like, I'm not taking those chops, brother. Here's what we're gonna do. Chin locks, I get the heat, you make your comeback and win. Like, I'm really like, I'm more excited
Yeah,
about that
is he
match.
going to take those Walter
Yeah,
chops?
like I'm more excited about that match
Yeah,
than
you're
like
right. You're right.
I
I don't
might
think he
actually
is.
watch that match live. Um because I'm fascinated to see like as like a real test for like this should be an easy slam dunk like top 20 WWE match this year at
Yeah,
least.
you could just see him rolling with that little luggage cart in the backstage and being like, "One thing, Walter, we're not doing those chops tonight, brother. All right, I know you like to do the chops, but
Yeah, or you can do
I'm
like
not. You're not
one.
beating this
Yeah,
chest up. All right. So
yeah.
here's what we're gonna do.
Because he's
Yeah,
also in this in addition to being Randy Orton, he's also in the stage of the career where he's like, "My back is killing me, like, been wrestling, taking bumps for 20 years, like, I've got way too much muscle mass now, so I'm probably gonna get injured again," like, a way lesser wrestler than Randy Orton could have an excellent match with Walter in that setting, and I'm just not and so I'm really fascinated to see if he can, like, has any ability to rise to the occasion at all, or is he just
right.
gonna really is the Randy Orton like mediocrity aura just gonna tank the entire thing? It's a fascinating match. I'm sure everyone's gonna say it's good anyway, but you know what I'm talking about when I mean like, is it actually gonna be good or not? Because it
Yeah,
should
it
be
is going
good.
to be fascinating. It is, because you're going to have that sort of, the immovable force of of,
Like
I'm trying to figure out
Randy
who's the
Orton's 2.5-star ability, like
yeah, who's the irresistible force of every Walter match is probably pretty good, and the immovable object of Randy Orton mediocrity. It's someone has to give, and I don't know who. You know,
Randy Orton laziness. Like
yeah.
he's gonna do like his Garvin stomps to get some heat from like the German fans. Um, chin locks, like I don't even know who is Falter is a heel, correct?
Yeah. That company, man, trying to figure out who's a babyface and who's a heel in that company is very difficult.
Yeah, like I know he'll be a babyface um in Berlin. Um
Yeah, but
well yeah.
he is, yeah, he's technically a heel, but
How nuanced do you think they're gonna be about like this being Walter's hometown? Like do you think
Austria,
they're gonna do you think they're gonna
Berlin,
do you think they're
tomato,
gonna
tomato, whatever.
you think they're gonna say like Walter is from nearby Austria, but spent most of his career wrestling in Germany, which is why he's such a big fan here. Or they're just going to be like, this is Walter's hometown, which I don't know exactly where he lived, but I know he was like running the WXW school
Hmm.
for like a long time, and I assumed he lived there, and that is not in Berlin. So
No.
is
Yeah,
the
he's
entire
obviously from
country,
Vienna. He's
yeah,
from Vienna, which is
the
not in
entire
the same country.
The entire German speaking world is Walter's hometown.
Yeah. Yeah, they'd probably just do that because they don't really respect their audience enough to know what the difference of Austria and Germany is. So they'll probably just say, "Oh, region. He's well known in this region, or he has roots in this region." They might say region. You know what I mean? They'll probably go with
Yeah, like
region,
what
I
did they
think.
say with Drew when they were in like Cardiff? Like,
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I think they just said region, or this part of the country, this part of the
yeah.
world, or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
because
probably the
Walter's
easy way to.
technically not even from the same country.
No,
Yeah.
but that won't matter.
All right, Rich, do you have anything to plug to the 0% of listeners that don't know who you are?
There might be somebody out
There
there.
are listeners who listen
You
to the
definitely
show
have your own
solely for
audience.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely have your own audience, which is good. You want that own audience. But yeah, I do the Flagship Podcast every week on the Voice of Wrestling Podcast Network, where you're hopefully listening to this show right here, the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast on the Voice of Wrestling Podcast Network. So I do the Flagship every single week. And in addition to that, bonus audio, written coverage, and a bunch of other stuff on our Patreon at flagshippatreon.com. We have a $5 tier, which gets you all the bonus audio. And then we have a $10 tier, which has written content as well as live shows and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, we also have a free tier too. If you just want to sign up at flagshippatreon.com, we do have some free content that goes out there, and it keeps you aware of what we're posting. So if you see something that that catches your eye, you can go and upgrade to the $5, $10 tier. But yeah, we have a ton of content out there. I think we work just as hard, if not harder, than most other wrestling Patreons out there. So really proud of what we do there at flagshippatreon.com. So give us a look.
Yeah, a lot of Flagship Plus content being ushered out last month. I mean, between Flagship Plus, Joe's G1 recaps, the last month has been a time to jump on.
Absolutely. And I talked about that Change the World Series with AEW. I mean, that it's fascinating now to go back. And one thing that I'm doing with that too, which is really cool, is for the first time really ever in a retro series, I'm able, because I can't go back and listen to my thoughts about SummerSlam 1992. I wasn't watching it live, but I've watched all these AEW shows live, and Joe and I talked about every one of these AEW shows live. So what I'm doing with the Change the World series is I'm recapping and reviewing the show or the main event or whatever, and then we're going back and listening to our old reviews of that match and seeing, how our tastes have evolved, or how our discussions about AEW have changed over time, or maybe they've stayed the same. And that's kind of the fascinating thing to see. Okay, now 5 years ago, what did I think about this match that I now just reviewed here in 2024? So I think that's made for a pretty fun part of the series too.
All right. I want to thank Rich for joining the show once again. I want to thank all my listeners, and we'll talk to you again after a while.